Tonight, we're uncovering the complete story of Mysaria, the White Worm. There is plenty to unpack tonight, but I'll keep the narration slow and steady so you can still ease into sleep. Thank you to those of you who've been joining us consistently. If you're falling asleep with us tonight, let me know in the comments how many nights in a row you've been here. And if this is your first night, just comment night 1. Now back to the video. Mysaria entered the history of the Targaryen dynasty without a castle, a famous family name, or a dragon. In the book tradition, she came from Lace, one of the glittering free cities across the narrow sea, and made her living as a dancer and a prostitute. Her skin was described as milk pale, almost porcelain in appearance, and from that pale complexion came the name by which the capital would remember her, the White Worm. It was not an affectionate name. A worm moves quietly beneath the earth, unseen until it has already passed through the walls and foundations of a place. Mysaria became that sort of presence in King's Landing. To her enemies, she was Lady Misery, a foreign-born woman who seemed to flourish wherever secrets, desire, and fear gathered together. To those who needed information, however, she could be something far more valuable, a listener who understood that the smallest rumor might one day be worth more than gold. Her path crossed with Prince Daemon Targaryen during the restless years of King Viserys I. Daemon was the king's younger brother, a brilliant and dangerous prince who had little patience for the quiet limits of courtly life. He found in Mysaria a lover and, for a time, a favored companion. Their connection gave her a place near the royal family, though never a secure one. In Westeros, a prince might raise a low-born woman close to him for an evening, a season, or even a year, but the distance between being wanted and being protected was vast. In 105 after conquest, Daemon took Mysaria with him to Dragonstone. There, word spread that she was carrying his child. Daemon gave the unborn baby a dragon egg, as Targaryens sometimes did for children still waiting to be born. It was both a gift and a declaration. The prince was telling the realm that this child, and perhaps Mysaria herself, mattered to him. King Viserys answered with the full weight of his authority. Daemon was ordered to return the egg and send Mysaria away to Lys. The egg came back. Mysaria was placed aboard a ship and sent east across the narrow sea. During a storm, she lost the child. That loss is one of the quietest and most important moments in her story. It did not give Mysaria an army or a crown. It gave her something colder, a clearer understanding of how easily powerful men could claim intimacy, then allow politics to carry away the consequences. When she returned to King's Landing in later years, she was no longer simply Daemon's companion. She had become a woman with her own methods of survival. The city was well suited to her. King's Landing was crowded, hungry, and endlessly talkative. Servants overheard nobles. Tavern keepers heard sailors' tales. Guards accepted bribes. Children slipped through alleys where armored knights could not follow. Mysaria learned how to turn this restless human current into a web of whispers. Her eyes and ears reached into brothels, docks, markets, kitchens, and the shadowed rooms where people spoke more freely when they believed no one important was listening. When the dance of the dragons began, the realm's great lords chose sides beneath banners of black and green. Mysaria's power did not depend on banners, it depended on access. She became an indispensable intermediary for Daemon and for Queen Rhaenyra, carrying knowledge from the hidden city into the halls of power. After Prince Lucerys Velaryon was killed, grief and vengeance settled heavily over the Black faction. In that atmosphere, Mysaria helped connect Daemon with the men remembered as Blood and Cheese. What followed was the murder of young Prince Jaehaerys, an act so cruel that even in a civil war full of dragon fire and broken oaths, it remained a wound that never properly closed. Yet Mysaria was more than the shadow behind a single atrocity. As Rhaenyra eventually took King's Landing, the White Worm became something close to an unofficial mistress of whisperers. She warned the queen of dangers rising within the city, including the gathering anger that would erupt during the riot of King's Landing. Her knowledge could protect a ruler, but it could also sharpen a ruler's suspicions. That was especially true when Mysaria brought Rhaenyra word of Daemon and the young dragon rider Nettles. Whether the accusation was entirely true, partly true, or shaped by fear and jealousy, its effect was devastating. Rhaenyra ordered Nettles killed. Daemon once more stood between love, loyalty, and ruin. Mysaria had begun as an outsider whose name could be dismissed by princes. By the height of the dance, queens listened when she spoke, and kingdoms suffered when her messages arrived. To understand Mysaria, you have to understand that she was never meant to be seen. The most dangerous figures in King's Landing were not the ones who stood in the sunlight, wearing crowns or carrying swords. They were the ones who moved through the cracks, who knew the weight of a whispered name, who could make a rumor bloom into a crisis, or let it wither into nothing. Mysaria entered the history of the dance not as a dragon rider, noblewoman, or general, but as a whisper in the dark. That whisper carried more weight than any blade, because it could reach places steel could not. Her pale appearance earned her the name the White Worm, a title that suggests both fragility and hidden danger. A worm is soft, easily crushed, but it lives beneath the earth, unseen, and it can hollow out foundations until the whole structure collapses. That was Mysaria's power. She was not strong in the way of knights or lords. She was strong in the way of patience, of listening, of knowing that the smallest piece of information could be turned into leverage. In a city like King's Landing, where every noble believed they were the center of the world, she understood that the real center was the network of servants, whores, merchants, and guards who carried secrets from one room to the next. She built that network carefully, over years. She did not rely on a single source or a single method. She learned the rhythms of the city, the hours when the fish market was busiest, the taverns where sailors drank too freely, the brothels where men spoke more openly than they ever would in a council chamber. She paid in coin, but also in protection, in small favors, in the promise that a word dropped in her ear might never be traced back to its source. To those who needed information, she could be indispensable. To enemies, she was Lady Misery, a foreign-born corrupter at the heart of royal power, a woman who had no right to influence the affairs of Westeros, but who did so anyway, because she understood that power is not always written in bloodlines. Her story reveals how a woman with no castle, army, or family name can shape a civil war. She did not command armies. She did not ride a dragon. She did not sit on a council. But she knew what the councillors whispered when they thought no one was listening. She knew which lords were wavering in their loyalty, which merchants were smuggling gold to the greens, which guards could be bribed to open a gate. That knowledge was her currency, and she spent it carefully, always aware that a single misstep could mean her death. There is a reason she was called the White Worm. The worm does not announce itself. It does not fight in the open. It waits, and it burrows, and it changes the shape of the ground from below. By the time the Dance of the Dragons reached its bloodiest days, Mysaria had become something more than a spy. She was a force that moved through the city like a current, carrying messages that could decide who lived and who died. And yet, for all her influence, she remained invisible to most of the great houses. They saw her as a tool, a means to an end, never quite understanding that she was the one using them. Before she became the White Worm, before she learned to move through the shadows of the Red Keep, she was a girl in Lys, far from the Iron Throne, learning the first lessons of survival in a city where beauty was both a gift and a curse. Lys was a city of silk and poison, where pleasure and death were traded in equal measure. The girl who would become Mysaria learned early that her body was not her own. It was a commodity, a tool for survival. She was sold as a bed slave before she understood what that meant, passed from one master to another, each one teaching her a different lesson about power. Some taught her that men are weakest when they believe they are in control. Others taught her that a woman's tears can be a weapon, that a whispered secret can buy a life. She learned to read not letters, but faces, to hear the truth beneath flattery, to see the fear that men tried to hide behind their bravado. In Lys, the line between servant and spy was thin, and she crossed it without knowing she had done so. She was still young when she was brought to Westeros, to the court of a minor lord who thought he had purchased a pretty toy. He did not realize he had purchased a woman who was already learning to listen, to remember, to wait. When he tired of her, she was sold again, and again, until she found herself in King's Landing, a city that swallowed the weak and rewarded the cunning. She did not stay a slave for long. She escaped her last master by trading a secret she had overheard, a piece of information about a stolen shipment of grain that, when revealed, ruined a merchant and freed her from her chains. That was her first deliberate use of knowledge as currency. She never forgot the taste of that freedom. From then on, she worked in the pleasure houses of the Street of Silk, but she was never just a whore. She was a collector. She learned the names of the men who visited, the whispers they exchanged in the dark, the promises they made when they thought no one was listening. She built her network one bedchamber at a time, one drunken confession, one bribe, one carefully placed rumor. And when she caught the attention of Prince Daemon Targaryen, she did not simply become his lover, she became his informant, his eyes in the shadows of a city that hated him. Daemon saw in her what few others did, a mind as sharp as any blade, a loyalty that could be bought but never stolen. He gave her resources, protection, and a purpose. She gave him the secrets that kept him alive. Their partnership was not love, not exactly, but it was a kind of trust, forged in mutual ambition. When Daemon left for the Stepstones, she stayed behind, and she did not wait idly. She deepened her roots, expanded her web, and prepared for the war she knew was coming. Because in King's Landing, peace was always just the silence before the scream. And when the scream came, when Viserys died, when Rhaenyra and Aegon claimed the throne, Mysaria was ready. She did not choose a side out of sentiment. She chose the side that offered her the most room to maneuver, the side that would let her become something more than a whisper. She chose Rhaenyra, not because she believed in her claim, but because Rhaenyra's cause needed the kind of shadow work that Mysaria had perfected. And in that choice, she sealed her place in the dance of the dragons, not as a queen, not as a warrior, but as the woman who held the strings when no one was looking. She came from across the narrow sea, from a city that had no king and no queen, only magisters and merchants and slaves. Lys. The name itself sounds like silk slipping through fingers, but the city was anything but soft. Lys was one of the wealthy and dangerous free cities of Essos, a place where pleasure and poison were traded in equal measure, where perfumed gardens hid the screams of the auction block, and where beauty was a currency that could buy you a palace or a pyre. In book canon, Mysaria is a woman of Lys. That is her origin, her birthplace, her first wound. She was not born to privilege, not born to a noble house with a sigil and a sword. She was born into a world where a girl's worth was measured in the color of her hair and the curve of her hip. And in Lys, that worth was often sold. She arrives in Westeros as a dancer and a prostitute. Those are the occupations that open the door for her, the only ones available to a woman with no name, no family, no protector. She dances in the pleasure houses of King's Landing, moves through the shadows of the Street of Silk, and learns quickly that her body is a tool, but her mind is the only weapon that cannot be taken from her. These occupations expose her to powerful men. She sees them at their most vulnerable, their most honest, their most dangerous. A lord who whispers secrets into the ear of a whore believes he is safe. He believes she is nothing, a vessel for his desires, a piece of furniture that can be discarded at dawn. But Mysaria listens. She remembers. She learns that the men who rule Westeros are no different from the magisters of lies. They are driven by greed, by fear, by the need to possess what they cannot keep. But her foreign birth makes her an outsider in King's Landing. The highborn society of the Red Keep treats her as disposable. She is not one of them. She does not speak with the accent of the Reach or the Riverlands. Her skin is pale, almost translucent, like milk poured over porcelain, and that marks her as different, as other. They call her the White Worm, a name meant to degrade, to remind her that she is a creature that burrows in the dark, that she is beneath their notice. But she takes that name and wears it like armor. The city's underworld teaches her the first rule of survival. Secrets are more valuable than gold. In the alleys and the brothels, in the kitchens and the stables. She learns that every man has a weakness, every woman has a regret, every lord has a sin he would pay any price to hide. She collects these secrets like a merchant collects coin, and she begins to understand that power in King's Landing does not come from dragons or swords. It comes from knowing what others do not want you to know. She is not a fighter. She does not wield a blade or command an army, but she learns to read the room, to read the faces of the men who use her, to see the fear behind their arrogance. And she learns that the most dangerous people in the world are the ones who are invisible, the ones who are ignored, the ones who are treated as nothing, because they see everything. And so the stranger from across the narrow sea begins to build her web. She does not seek revenge. She does not seek justice. She seeks survival, and then she seeks influence. And in a city where the powerful are constantly at war with each other, a woman who knows where the bodies are buried is worth more than 1,000 knights. This is the foundation of everything that follows. The dancer becomes a whisperer, the outsider becomes a broker, the woman from Lys becomes the White Worm, and the White Worm begins to crawl into the cracks of the Iron Throne itself. And so she crawls into those cracks, deeper than anyone suspects. It is not long before she catches the attention of a prince, Daemon Targaryen, the rogue prince himself, a man who also lives in the margins of power, who burns with ambition and resentment. He finds her in a pleasure house, but he does not treat her as a whore. He treats her as an equal, or at least as a useful tool. And that is the opening she needs. She becomes his mistress, his confidant, his spy master. She feeds him secrets from the streets, whispers that no lord would dare speak aloud. In return, he gives her protection, a measure of status, and access to the very heart of the dragon's den. But Daemon is unpredictable, a flame that can warm or burn. When he is exiled from King's Landing, she goes with him, first to the Stepstones, then to Pentos. She watches him wage war, sees the blood and the fire, and she learns that even a dragon can be wounded. She learns that the most powerful men are often the most fragile. And when Daemon returns to Westeros, when he marries Rhaenyra and becomes the king consort, Mysaria does not fade into the background. She returns to King's Landing, but now she is no longer a dancer. She is a whisper network, a shadow economy, a woman who knows where every lord's skeleton is buried. The dance of the dragons begins, and the city becomes a battlefield of spies. The Greens and the Blacks both seek her services. Otto Hightower tries to buy her loyalty, but she has already chosen her side, not out of love for Rhaenyra, but out of a cold calculation. Daemon is her path to power, and Daemon stands with the Black Queen. She becomes the master of whisperers for the Blacks, operating from a secret chamber in the Red Keep, directing a network of informants that stretches from the Street of Silk to the highest towers. She is the one who uncovers the plots against Rhaenyra, who warns of the betrayals, who arranges the assassinations that are never spoken aloud. And yet, she remains invisible. The lords and ladies of the court still sneer at her, still call her the White Worm, still believe she is nothing but a foreign whore who has wormed her way into the prince's bed. They do not see that she is the one pulling the strings. They do not see that she has become the most feared woman in Westeros, not because she wields a sword, but because she wields the truth. She knows that the war is not won by dragons alone. It is won by the whispers that turn allies into enemies, by the secrets that destroy houses, by the knowledge that a single word can topple a throne. In the end, when the war is over, when the dragons are dead and the realm is broken, Mysaria survives. She outlives Daemon. She outlives Rhaenyra. She outlives nearly everyone who ever dismissed her. And she walks away from the ashes of King's Landing with a fortune in gold and a head full of secrets that no one will ever know. The woman from Lys, the dancer, the whore, the white worm. She becomes a legend, a ghost, a warning. She proves that the most dangerous creature in the world is not a dragon. It is a woman who has been told she is nothing and who chooses to become everything. In book canon, Mysaria is a woman of Lys, one of the wealthy and dangerous free cities of Essos. She arrives in Westeros as a dancer and prostitute, occupations that expose her to powerful men while denying her their protections. That much is clear from the written record. But when House of the Dragon brought her to the screen, the showrunners made a deliberate choice that complicates her background, obscuring or altering her connection to Lys. In the adaptation, when Mysaria speaks of her origins, she does not mention Lys at all. Instead, she describes a childhood in Yi, a distant empire on the far eastern edge of the known world. This is a major difference from the book tradition, and it is worth examining why the change was made and what it means for the character. The decision to shift her birthplace from Lys to Yi is not a small detail. In George R.R. Martin's world, a character's homeland carries weight. Lys is a city of pleasure houses and perfumed gardens, known for producing beautiful slaves and skilled courtesans. A woman from Lys is expected to be alluring, exotic, and dangerous in a familiar, almost cliché way. Yi, by contrast, is a land of mystery and legend, rarely visited by Westerosi, and even more rarely understood. By making Mysaria Yitish, the show deepens her otherness. She becomes not just a foreigner from across the narrow sea, but a woman from a place so remote that most in King's Landing would struggle to picture it on a map. This change matters because Mysaria's identity is central to how Westeros sees her, foreign, unknowable, and easy to blame. Whether she is Lysene or Yitish, she remains a woman shaped by displacement and exploitation. But the shift to Yi amplifies the sense that she is an outsider twice over, someone whose true origins are hidden even from the audience. The show never fully confirms her story. She speaks of Yi in a way that could be truth, could be a lie, could be a performance she has crafted to survive. That ambiguity is itself a statement. In a world where a woman's past can be used against her, Mysaria controls the narrative. She gives only what she chooses. And what she chooses is a tale of a childhood far from the silk markets of lies, a childhood that ends in slavery and a long journey westward. The canon question of her origins is thus left unresolved, a deliberate blurring that mirrors the way Westeros itself sees her, as a blank slate onto which fear and suspicion can be projected. But regardless of which city she first called home, the core of her story remains unchanged. She is a woman who arrived in King's Landing with nothing but her wits and her body, who learned to navigate the treacherous currents of the court, and who built a network of whispers that would one day make her indispensable to a queen. Her origins, whether Lysene or Yitish, are the foundation of that survival. They taught her that the world sees her as an object, and that the only way to gain power is to become the one who pulls the strings. And it is this background of exploitation and hard-won cunning that would soon bring her into the orbit of the most dangerous man in the Seven Kingdoms. That man, of course, is Prince Daemon Targaryen, the rogue prince, the king's brother, a warrior and a schemer whose own history is steeped in violence and ambition. Mysaria's path crosses his during the early years of Viserys I's reign, and their relationship becomes one of the most fascinating and ambiguous partnerships in the entire Dance of the Dragons. In the books, Mysaria is Daemon's mistress for a time, and she is the one who arranges for the purchase of a dragon egg for their unborn child, a scheme that ends in tragedy and scandal. The show adapts this thread, but weaves it differently, giving Mysaria a more active and calculating role. She is not merely a lover discarded when Daemon tires of her. She is a player in her own right, a woman who uses the prince's infatuation as a stepping stone to greater influence. When Daemon returns from the Stepstones, it is Mysaria who greets him, who understands his restless hunger for power, and who plants the seeds of his later defiance against the crown. Their intimacy is transactional, but it is also genuine in its own way, a meeting of two outsiders who recognize the fire in each other. Yet Mysaria's true power does not lie in her bed, but in her network of spies and informants. She builds what becomes known as the White Worm, a shadowy intelligence operation that stretches from the gutters of Fleabottom to the corridors of the Red Keep. In a court where information is the most valuable currency, Mysaria becomes one of the richest people in King's Landing, though her wealth is measured in secrets, not gold. She knows who is plotting against whom, which lords are disloyal, which servants can be bribed, and which whispers are worth more than a sword. This makes her invaluable to Rhaenyra Targaryen when the succession crisis erupts into open war. The Queen, desperate for allies and intelligence, turns to the woman who once shared her uncle's bed. And Mysaria, ever pragmatic, sees an opportunity to rise from the shadows into the light of power. Her role in the dance is pivotal. She becomes Rhaenyra's Mistress of Whispers, a position that grants her access to the Queen's most guarded plans. But she is not a loyal servant. She is a survivor, and her loyalty shifts with the wind. In the book, Mysaria eventually betrays Rhaenyra, feeding information to the Greens and contributing to the fall of the Black faction. The show has not yet reached that point, but the seeds are there. Mysaria's actions are always calculated to benefit herself first. She serves no king or queen, only the cause of Mysaria. And in that, she is perhaps the most honest character in the entire story. She does not pretend to be noble or selfless. She is a woman who has learned that love is a weakness and trust is a trap, and she acts accordingly. Her end, in the historical records, is as brutal as her beginnings. After the war, when the dragons are dead and the realm is broken, Mysaria is arrested and executed by the new regime, her tongue torn out before she is burned alive. It is a death that mirrors the cruelty of the world she navigated, a final silencing of a woman who knew too much and spoke too freely. But in the telling of her story, whether in the books or on screen, she remains a figure of fascination, a reminder that in the Game of Thrones, the players are not always the ones with crowns. Sometimes they are the ones with secrets, the ones who whisper in the dark, the ones who survive long enough to see the mighty fall. And Mysaria, the foreign whore who became the Queen's shadow, is one of the most unforgettable of them all. The question of where Mysaria truly came from is not the only mystery surrounding her. Even if we accept the book tradition that she was born in Lys, we still have to ask what kind of city shaped her. What kind of world did she step into when she arrived in Westeros? The answer is a city that, under King Viserys I, was prosperous on the surface and rotten underneath. This is the King's Landing that Mysaria learned to navigate, a place of stark and brutal contrasts. The Red Keep, the great castle that looms over the city, hosts feasts, marriages, and succession debates. Within its halls, lords and ladies argue over the rightful heir to the Iron Throne, while servants pour fine wine from the Reach and minstrels sing of ancient heroes. The court of Viserys I is a place of velvet and gold, of carefully worded compliments and hidden daggers. But the Red Keep is only the visible face of the capital. The alleys below, the warrens of Fleabottom, and the shadowy lanes near the river gate sell bodies, children, poison, and information. These are the true commodities of King's Landing. In the street markets, you can buy a hot pie or a cold knife. In the brothels, you can purchase a night's comfort or a whispered secret. The city is a living organism, and like any organism, it has a digestive tract. The wealthy are the mouth, consuming everything in sight. The poor are the gut, where everything is broken down and processed. And Mysaria, when she arrived, was just another piece of food entering that system. She was not born to power. She had no family name, no lands, no sworn swords. She had only her body, her wits, and her ability to read people. In a city of appetite, those tools can keep you alive, but they cannot make you safe. She began as a dancer, then a prostitute. These are not occupations that grant respect in Westeros. They grant access. The men who visited her were not all brutes. Some were merchants with information to sell. Some were knights with secrets to keep. Some were lords with ambitions that required discretion. Mysaria listened. She learned. She began to understand that in King's Landing, the most valuable currency is not gold, it is knowledge. And knowledge, once gathered, can be traded for protection. But to truly rise, she needed a patron. She needed someone who could move between both worlds. Someone equally at home in royal chambers and brothels. That man was Prince Daemon Targaryen. Daemon was the king's brother, a warrior, a dragon rider, and a man of restless appetites. He was as comfortable in the throne room as he was in the street of silk. He was drawn to danger, to chaos, to women who were not afraid of the dark. And Mysaria, with her pale skin and her sharp eyes, was not afraid of anything. She became his lover, his confidant, and for a time his closest companion. In the brothels of King's Landing, she had learned the value of secrets. With Daemon, she learned the value of access. He brought her into the orbit of the court, not as a lady, but as something more dangerous, a woman who knew too much. It is in this city of appetite that Mysaria becomes more than another forgotten courtesan. She becomes a player. She begins to build her network, one whispered confidence at a time. She learns which lords are in debt, which knights are disloyal, which merchants are smuggling goods past the city watch. She learns the names of the children who run messages for the underworld, and the names of the men who run the underworld itself. She becomes a spider in a web of her own making, and the flies are the powerful men of the Red Keep who believe they are using her. They are wrong. This transformation does not happen overnight. It takes years. It takes patience. It takes the willingness to be underestimated. And Mysaria is very good at being underestimated. She is dismissed as a whore, a foreigner, a woman of no consequence. But the men who dismiss her are the same men who later find their secrets laid bare at the worst possible moment. She does not fight with steel. She fights with information. And in a city as hungry and treacherous as King's Landing, information is the sharpest blade of all. In the city of appetites, one appetite burned brighter than most. Prince Daemon Targaryen was the king's younger brother, a prince with a dragon, a sword, and an endless hunger for recognition. He was everything a Targaryen prince was supposed to be. Bold, reckless, magnetic, and dangerous. He had ridden Caraxes into battle, led the city watch with an iron fist, and made enemies of half the court simply by existing. And yet, for all his fire and fury, Daemon was restless. He craved more than the throne could give him. He craved a companion who would not bow, who would not flatter, who would see him not as a prince but as a man. He found that companion in a dancer from the streets of Lys. Mysaria was not the first woman Daemon had taken to his bed, but she quickly became something more. She was sharp, observant, and unafraid to speak her mind. Where other courtiers whispered behind his back, she looked him in the eye. Where noble ladies simpered and schemed, she offered a quiet, knowing silence. Daemon was drawn to that. He was drawn to her. Mysaria becomes his lover, and at times one of his closest companions. It was an arrangement that defied every convention of the Red Keep. A prince of the blood does not keep a foreign dancer as a confidant. He does not share his thoughts with a woman who has sold her body for coin. But Daemon did not care for convention. He cared for loyalty, for wit, for someone who had nothing to gain from his title, and everything to lose by his side, and Mysaria gave him that. Their relationship is unequal in rank, but politically explosive, because Daemon treats her as more than a passing amusement. He did not hide her away. He brought her to court, to feasts, to the private chambers where he plotted and brooded. He listened to her counsel. He trusted her instincts. To the lords and ladies of King's Landing, this was an insult. A low-born whore sitting at the prince's table, whispering in his ear. They sneered at her, called her Lady Misery behind her back, but they also watched her. They learned to fear her, because Daemon did not discard her. He kept her close, and that meant she had power. Through Daemon, Mysaria gains access to the world that once looked down on her from behind castle walls. She walked the corridors of the Red Keep, not as a servant, not as a petitioner, but as the prince's chosen companion. She heard the plots, the betrayals, the secret alliances. She learned the names of every lord who owed debts, every knight with a grudge, every merchant who sold information for silver. The world that had once been closed to her now opened its doors, not because she had been invited, but because she had attached herself to a dragon. And yet, for all that Daemon gave her, the relationship was never safe. A prince's favourite is always a target. The court watched for any misstep. The king Viserys grew uneasy. Daemon's brother loved him, but he also feared him. And when Daemon installed Mysaria on Dragonstone, when he gave her a place in the Targaryen ancestral seat, the whispers grew louder. Then came the pregnancy. Daemon, following the old customs, placed a dragon egg in the cradle of his unborn child. It was a gesture of profound commitment, a declaration that this child, born of a Lycene dancer, would be a true Targaryen, but the king would not allow it. Viserys ordered the egg returned. He ordered Mysaria sent away, and Daemon, for all his defiance, could not refuse his brother's command. Mysaria was put on a ship bound for Lys, carrying the child and the loss of everything she had gained. A storm struck the narrow sea. She lost the child. She nearly lost her own life. When she washed ashore, she was no longer the dancer who had charmed a prince. She was something else. She was a woman with nothing left to lose, and that made her far more dangerous than any favourite. The court thought they had seen the last of her. They were wrong. The White Worm would return, not as a lover, but as a power in her own right. And the seeds of that return were planted in the ashes of her time with Daemon, in the loss that would drive her to build a network of whispers that stretched from the gutters of Flea Bottom to the throne room of the Red Keep. Daemon Targaryen's choice of companion was never accidental. When he took Mysaria as his lover, he was making a statement that the court could not ignore. She was not a noblewoman, not a Velaryon, not even a Westerosi. She was a dancer from across the narrow sea, a woman whose skin was pale as milk, whose past was written in the alleys of Lys, and Daemon chose her. That choice in itself was a kind of rebellion. Daemon's attraction to Mysaria reflects his instinct for defying the expectations placed upon him. He was the king's brother, a dragon rider, a prince of the blood. He could have had any high-born lady, any daughter of a great house, but he did not want what was offered. He wanted what was forbidden. He wanted what would sting the court that always kept him at arm's length. Mysaria was not just a lover. She was a weapon aimed at the Red Keep. Every time he was seen with her, every time he brought her to a tourney or a feast, he was humiliating the lords and ladies who whispered about him behind their fans. He was telling them that their approval meant nothing, and Mysaria understood this. She understood that Daemon is not merely reckless. He is a man constantly testing where power truly lies. Recklessness is blind. Daemon was not blind. He knew exactly what he was doing when he flaunted her. He was probing the limits of the king's patience, the tolerance of the court, the boundaries of his own exile. And Mysaria, who had spent her life reading the desires and fears of powerful men, saw through his bravado. She saw the prince who burned for recognition, who wanted to be feared and loved in equal measure. She did not try to tame him. She became his mirror. Their bond becomes the bridge between the royal family and King's Landing's hidden networks. Daemon moved through the world of dragons and swords. Mysaria moved through the world of whispers and shadows. Together, they connected the Red Keep to the brothels, the gambling dens, the rat pits of the city. She knew which lord had debts, which merchant had secrets, which guard could be bought. Daemon gave her access to the highest circles. She gave him access to the lowest. It was a partnership built on mutual usefulness. And it was dangerous, precisely because it was so practical. The court watched with a mixture of disgust and fascination. Queen Alicent's faction saw Mysaria as a stain on the crown. The small folk saw her as a woman who had risen from nothing to the prince's bed. And Daemon? He saw her as proof that he could take what he wanted, no matter what the rules said. He was the rogue prince, and she was his white worm, pale and creeping, hidden in the foundations of the city. But even a partnership built on defiance has its breaking points. And the first crack came when Mysaria found herself with child on Dragonstone, a child that Daemon, in a rare moment of tradition, gifted a dragon egg. That egg would not stay in the cradle. That child would not be born in safety. The storm was already gathering on the narrow sea, and it would carry Mysaria away from Daemon, away from the court, and into a darkness that would shape everything that followed. The child never came. The egg never hatched. On Dragonstone, Mysaria's body betrayed her, and the pregnancy ended in blood and silence. Daemon stood at the window of the stone chamber, staring at the sea, while the maester washed the sheets. He did not weep. He did not rage. He simply left. He flew Caraxes into the storm, and for 3 days no one saw him. When he returned, his clothes were salt-stained, and his eyes were hollow. But he spoke no word of what had happened. Mysaria was sent away, not exiled, not discarded, but removed as one removes a splinter that has festered. She was given gold, a ship, and a command never to return. Daemon did not say goodbye. He could not. To say goodbye would be to admit that he had failed, that he had lost something he had not intended to value. And so Mysaria vanished into the alleys of Lys, carrying with her the secrets of the Red Keep, the names of the Bort guards, the debts of the lords. She became a ghost, and ghosts are patient, but the white worm does not die. She only grows colder. In the years that followed, Mysaria rebuilt herself. She learned the trade of information, of influence, of the quiet strings that move kingdoms. She became a whisper network unto herself, a woman who could topple a house with a single word spoken in the right ear. And when the dance of the dragons began, she did not return to Daemon out of love. She returned because the war was a market, and she had the sharpest prices. Their reunion was not tender, it was transactional. He needed eyes in the city. She needed a dragon's shadow. They met in a cellar beneath a burned-out brothel, and they did not embrace. They negotiated, and that perhaps is the truest shape of their bond. Not romance, not rebellion, but a mutual recognition of usefulness. Daemon saw in her the only person who had ever truly understood his hunger. Mysaria saw in him the only prince who had ever treated her as an equal in cunning. Together, they would burn the realm, not for love, but because the fire was already lit, and they were the only ones willing to walk into it with their eyes open. Daemon Targaryen had always been drawn to the margins, to the people and places that the court preferred to ignore. Mysaria was the embodiment of that instinct. A woman from the gutters of Lys, a dancer and a prostitute, yet somehow the one person who seemed to understand the rogue prince without judgment. Their affair was already a scandal in King's Landing, a whispered insult to the decorum of the Red Keep. But in the year 105 after Aegon's conquest, Daemon chose to escalate that scandal into something far more dangerous. He brought Mysaria to Dragonstone. Dragonstone is not just a castle. It is the ancestral seat of House Targaryen, the place where Aegon the Conqueror began his campaign to unite the Seven Kingdoms. Its walls are carved from volcanic stone, shaped by dragonfire and ancient Valyrian sorcery. Every hall, every corridor, every chamber breathes the history of a dynasty that once ruled an empire across the sea. To bring a low-born foreign woman, there was not merely an act of affection, It was a declaration. Daemon was telling the world that Mysaria belonged in that history, that she was not just a passing amusement, but a fixture in his life. And then she became pregnant. That changed everything. A bastard child of a Targaryen prince was not unusual. Daemon had fathered bastards before, and they were quietly forgotten. But this was different. This child was conceived on Dragonstone, in the very heart of Targaryen power, and Daemon did something that no one expected. He presented Mysaria with a dragon egg. In Targaryen tradition, a dragon egg was placed in the cradle of a newborn prince or princess, a symbol of the child's blood right and a hope that they might one day claim a dragon of their own. It was a ritual reserved for the true-born children of the royal line, for those who carried the name Targaryen. Daemon was offering that same honor to his unborn child with Mysaria. He was claiming in the most visible way possible that this child, born of a Lycene dancer, deserved a place in the dynasty. The gesture was both intimate and provocative. It was a private gift between lovers, a promise of a future together, but it was also a public challenge to the court, to his brother the king, to every lord and lady who had ever dismissed Mysaria as a whore. Daemon was saying that she and her child would not remain invisible. The egg itself was a thing of beauty, a shell of deep green and gold, warm to the touch, pulsing with the faint heat of a life not yet kindled. Mysaria held it in her hands, and for a moment the impossible seemed possible. She was not just the prince's mistress anymore. She was the mother of his child, a child that might one day ride a dragon, a child that might be acknowledged by the Iron Throne. But the Iron Throne had other ideas. King Viserys I, Daemon's older brother, had tolerated his brother's antics for years. He had forgiven the insults, the provocations, the open defiance. But this was too far. A dragon egg was not a trinket to be given to a bastard. It was a symbol of Targaryen legitimacy, and to place it in the hands of a foreign whore was to cheapen the blood of the dragon. Viserys sent word to Dragonstone, commanding Daemon to return the egg and to send Mysaria away. The king's order was not a request. It was a decree. Daemon could have refused. He had a dragon. He had a fortress. He had the loyalty of men who would fight for him. But defying the king openly meant war, and even Daemon was not ready for that. He complied. The egg was taken back, placed once more in the royal vaults, and Mysaria was put on a ship bound for Lys, her belly swollen with the child that would never know the warmth of that egg. The voyage across the narrow sea was brutal. A storm rose, the kind of storm that turns the sea into a churning wall of black water. The ship was battered, the crew terrified, and Mysaria, alone and without protection, miscarried. The child was lost before it ever drew breath. Some say she lost the child in the storm itself, that the waves took it as surely as they took the hopes she had carried. Others say she arrived in Lys, broken and bleeding, the life already gone from her womb. Either way, the child was dead. The dragon egg would never be claimed. That loss would haunt Mysaria for the rest of her life. It hardened her, sharpened her, turned her from a woman who had hoped for a place in the Targaryen world into a woman who would carve her own place by any means necessary. She did not forget the dragon egg. She did not forget the king who had taken it from her, and she did not forget Daemon, the prince who had given her that impossible gift and then let it be taken away. She would return to Westeros. She would build a network of whispers and secrets that would make her one of the most dangerous people in the realm. But that was still years away. For now, she was just a woman on a ship, alone, bleeding, and carrying nothing but the memory of a child that never was. When the news reached King's Landing, it did not travel as a whisper. It arrived as a roar, carried by ravens and sailors, and the kind of rumour that sticks to stone. Prince Daemon Targaryen, the king's own brother, had installed his foreign lover on Dragonstone. He had given her a dragon egg. He had planted a child in her belly and called it a Targaryen heir before it had even drawn breath. And he had done all of this without asking, without consulting the crown, without so much as a nod toward the authority that sat on the Iron Throne. King Viserys I was not a man known for explosive temper. He was a conciliator, a man who preferred feasts to fights and compromise to confrontation. But this was not a matter of courtly slights or minor disagreements. This was a direct challenge to the very structure of royal power. A dragon egg was not a trinket. It was a symbol of the dynasty itself, a living promise of the bloodline's continuity. To hand one to a woman of no name, no house, no standing, was to treat the most sacred tradition of House Targaryen as though it were a bauble to be tossed to a favourite, and that was only half the problem. The other half was the child. If that child lived, if it hatched that egg and bonded with a dragon, then Daemon would have created a new branch of the royal family outside the king's control, a rival household, born not of marriage or alliance but of pure defiance. Viserys could not allow it. He could not allow Daemon to distribute dragon eggs and royal status as he pleased, as though he were the king himself. The crown's authority rested on the principle that only the monarch could legitimize heirs, grant honors, and decide which eggs would be placed in which cradles. Daemon had stolen that privilege, and so the king did something he rarely did. He acted decisively. A royal summons was sent to Dragonstone. Daemon was commanded to appear before the king, and he was not given the option to refuse. When he arrived at the Red Keep, the atmosphere was cold. The usual smiles and jests between brothers were absent. Viserys received Daemon in a private chamber, away from the court, but the tension was thick enough to fill the throne room. The king did not shout. He did not need to. His words carried the weight of the crown itself. He told Daemon to return the dragon egg, not to keep it, not to hide it, but to bring it back to the royal nursery where it belonged. And he told Daemon to send Mysaria away from Dragonstone. She was to leave the island, leave his company, and return to wherever she had come from. The king did not say the word exile, but it hung in the air like smoke. Daemon argued, of course. He always argued. He spoke of his rights as a prince, of the ancient customs that allowed any Targaryen to bestow an egg upon his own offspring, but Viserys was unmoved. He reminded Daemon that he was not the king, that the eggs were not his to give, that the woman was not his wife, and the child was not his heir, and that if Daemon continued down this path, he would find himself stripped of more than just an egg. The confrontation exposed something deeper than a quarrel over a single egg. It revealed the fear that had been growing in the royal family for years. Daemon was the spare, the rogue, the prince who had been passed over for the throne. He had no fixed role, no lands of his own, no purpose beyond the king's tolerance, and so he'd begun to build his own purpose. Piece by piece, on Dragonstone, he had gathered a household, a lover, a child, a dragon egg. He was creating a rival centre of power, a miniature court that answered only to him. If he succeeded, he would no longer be the king's troublesome brother. He would be the founder of a new dynasty, a second line of Targaryens that could one day challenge the throne itself. That was the nightmare that kept Viserys awake at night, and that was why he crushed the dream before it could hatch. Mysaria watched all of this unfold from a distance. She was not present in the king's chamber, but she understood the outcome before Daemon returned to Dragonstone. The ravens flew faster than ships. The servants whispered. The castle walls had ears, and those ears belonged to her as much as to anyone. She learned that the prince's affection could bring wealth, comfort, and status. It could also bring danger. The same hand that had placed a dragon egg in her lap had now been forced to take it away. The same prince who had promised her a future had been ordered to send her into the unknown. She was not a wife. She was not a queen. She was a woman who had been lifted up by a prince's whim and could be cast down by a king's command. Daemon returned to Dragonstone with the egg. He did not speak much. He did not apologize. He was not the sort of man who apologized, but he told Mysaria that she would have to leave. He did not say forever, but he did not say when she could come back. He arranged for a ship to take her across the narrow sea to Liz, the city of her birth. He gave her gold, enough to live on for a time. He gave her promises that he would send for her when the storm passed. But storms in the royal family did not pass quickly. They gathered and broke and gathered again. And those caught in the open were often swept away. The ship sailed from Dragonstone on a grey morning. The sky was heavy, the sea was restless. Mysaria stood on the deck and watched the island shrink behind her. She carried nothing but the clothes on her back and the gold in her purse. The egg was gone. The child was still inside her, but it would not stay there for long. The journey was rough. The waves were high, and somewhere in the middle of the narrow sea, in the dark and the cold and the salt, she lost the child. It was not a miscarriage that anyone in King's Landing would mourn. It was not a tragedy that would be recorded in the histories. But for Mysaria, it was the moment when she understood the affection of a prince was not a shelter. It was a gamble, and she had lost. She arrived in Lys broken, empty-handed and alone, but she was not defeated. The woman who stepped off that ship was not the same woman who had left it. She had learned something that no courtesan, no spy, no survivor could afford to forget. Power was not given, it was taken. And if she ever returned to Westeros, she would not come back as a prince's plaything. She would come back as something far more dangerous. The king's command was absolute. Viserys had spoken, and Daemon, for all his defiance, could not keep a dragon egg that the crown demanded back, nor could he keep a pregnant mistress on Dragonstone when the realm's eyes had turned toward the succession. The egg was returned to the royal treasury, a small, scaled object that had held the promise of a new Targaryen life, now cold and purposeless in a vault. And Mysaria, the woman who had carried that promise, was to be sent away. Daemon did not fight the order with fire and blood. Perhaps he knew that this was one battle he could not win, not against his brother, not against the entire weight of the Iron Throne. Or perhaps he simply believed that exile was temporary, that Mysaria would go to Lys, wait out the king's displeasure, and return when the storm passed. He was a prince. He had dragons. He had always gotten what he wanted, eventually. But a ship does not care who its passenger has been sleeping with. Mysaria was placed aboard a vessel bound for Lys, the city of her birth, or at least the city she had claimed as her origin. The narrow sea stretched before her, grey and indifferent, a body of water that had carried conquerors, exiles, slaves and merchants for thousands of years. It had no memory of Daemon Targaryen, no respect for his name or his dragon. It was simply water, deep and cold and patient. The voyage began well enough. The winds were steady, the sky a pale autumn blue. Mysaria stayed below deck, as was expected of a woman being sent away in disgrace. But she could feel the motion of the ship beneath her, the creak of the hull, the distant calls of the sailors. She was not yet showing the child she carried, but she knew it was there, a small weight in her belly, a future that Daemon had promised to protect with dragonfire and royal blood. And then the storm came. It rose out of the east, a dark wall of cloud and wind that swallowed the horizon in a matter of hours. The sea turned from grey to black, and the waves grew tall, taller than the ship's mast, taller than anything the captain had seen in 20 years of sailing these waters. Rain lashed the deck in sheets, and the wind howled like something alive, something hungry. Mysaria was thrown from her bunk as the ship pitched violently to one side. She heard the sailors shouting, the captain screaming orders that were lost to the roar of the storm. The ship groaned, wood straining against wood, and for a long, terrible moment, she was certain that the vessel would break apart, and she would be swallowed by the sea, forgotten, unnamed, a footnote in a story that had never truly begun. But the ship did not sink. It survived, battered and leaking, but afloat. The storm passed, and the sea calmed, and the sun returned, pale and weak through the remaining clouds. It was only then that Mysaria realized she had lost the child. The bleeding started quietly, a warmth that spread beneath her clothes, a cramping that doubled her over. There was no maester on board, no midwife, no one who could help. The sailors gave her what little they had, a rough blanket, a cup of water, but they could not stop what was already happening. The child that Daemon had promised a dragon egg, the child that might have been a prince or princess of the blood, The child that could have tied Mysaria to the Targaryen dynasty forever, slipped away into the darkness of the narrow sea. She did not scream. She did not weep. She lay in the hold of that ship, alone, and she let the loss settle into her bones like the cold that had seeped into the wood. The loss ended the possibility that she might have entered Targaryen history as the mother of Daemon's child. That child, had it lived, would have been a living claim, a bridge between the low-born woman from Liz and the ancient house of the dragon. It would have given Mysaria a place, purpose, a reason for the court to remember her name, beyond the gossip and the scandal. But the sea had taken that future, and the sea did not negotiate. The ship finally reached Lys, a city of pleasure gardens and perfumed air, of silk and spice and the lingering scent of salt. Mysaria stepped onto the dock, her body hollow, her hands empty. She had left Dragonstone with a child and a promise. She arrived in Lys with nothing but the clothes on her back and the knowledge that she would never forget. Princes can promise protection. They can swear oaths, offer dragon eggs, speak of love and loyalty and the future they will build together. But their power cannot stop the sea. Their names cannot calm a storm. Their blood, for all its ancient magic, cannot hold a child in a woman's womb when the waves decide otherwise. Mysaria learned that lesson on the narrow sea, in the dark, in the pain, in the silence that followed, and she carried that lesson with her into the streets of Lys, where she would rebuild herself from the wreckage of what she had lost. She would not return to Westeros as Daemon's lover, not as a mother, not as a victim. She would return as something else entirely. Something the sea could not touch, something the princes could not control. But that was still years away. For now, there was only the city of Lys and the long work of survival. The storm that took Mysaria's child did not take her life, though for a time it may have felt as though it had. When she was finally carried to shore in Lys, she arrived as a woman stripped of nearly everything: a lover, a status, her unborn son or daughter, and any illusion that the world of princes and dragons would ever protect her. The court in King's Landing, if it thought of her at all, likely assumed that was the end of the White Worm, a dancer from the alleys of Lys, briefly lifted into the light by Daemon Targaryen's attention, then cast back into the darkness from which she came. That is how these stories usually end. The lowborn woman is used, discarded, and forgotten. But Mysaria did not vanish from the story after her exile, despite the court's likely expectation that she would. What happened in the years between her departure from Dragonstone and her return to King's Landing is not recorded in any chronicle. We know she did not remain in Lys. She came back to the capital, but she came back changed. The woman who had once been Daemon's favourite, who had let herself believe that a dragon prince's fave might be enough to secure her future, had learned a hard lesson. Favour is borrowed power. It can be revoked at any moment by a king's command, by a rival's whisper, by a storm on the narrow sea. If she wanted to survive in Westeros, she would need something that belonged to her alone, something that no prince could take away. So she returned to King's Landing, transformed by loss, experience, and a clearer understanding of survival. She did not seek out Daemon immediately. She did not try to reclaim her place in his bed or his confidence. Instead, she did something far more dangerous. She began to build a network. The city she had once known as a foreign dancer, vulnerable and exposed, she now studied as a map of secrets. Every tavern, every brothel, every market stall, every guardhouse and merchant's counting room. These were the veins of the capital, and she learned to listen to their pulse. She hired informants. She paid for whispers. She traded information for coin, for favours, for protection. She became a broker of secrets, and in a city like King's Landing, secrets are the truest currency. Rather than relying on Daemon's favour alone, she began building power that belonged to her. It was slow work. It was invisible work. No one in the Red Keep noticed the pale woman in the shadows of Flea Bottom. No lord or lady thought to fear a Lysine whore who had lost her prince's child. But that was precisely the point. The White Worm's true rise begins not in a royal bedchamber, but in the shadows beneath the city, in the damp cellars and crooked alleys, where the small folk live and die, where the crown's guards rarely venture, where the powerful never think to look. She did not forget Daemon. She did not forgive the court that had exiled her, but she learned to wait. And when the time came, when the dance of the dragons finally tore the realm apart, she would be ready. She would offer her services not as a lover seeking protection, but as a spy master offering leverage. The woman who returned from the narrow sea was no longer Mysaria the dancer, Mysaria the mistress. She was the white worm, and she had made the city her own. From that underground kingdom, she would eventually reach back into the world of dragons and queens, but on her own terms. The next chapter of her story would be written in blood and whispers, and it would begin with a prince's grief and a child's murder. But that is a tale for another telling. For now, let us leave her where she belongs. Not in the light of a royal hall, but in the darkness beneath the city, where the real power of King's Landing has always lived. And so she remained, a ghost in the flesh, moving through the city's underbelly. With a patience that bordered on the inhuman, she learned the rhythms of Fleet Bottom, the hours when the gold cloaks turned a blind eye, the merchants who would sell their own mothers for a silver stag, the desperate men and women who would do anything for a handful of coppers. She became their confidant, their creditor, their silent partner. She did not ask for loyalty, she asked for usefulness, and she paid well for it. Her network grew like roots beneath a stone. A cook in the Red Keep's kitchens, who overheard a lord's indiscreet whisper, a whore in a brothel near the Street of Silk, who learned the secrets of a visiting envoy, a dock worker who noticed which ships unloaded cargo under cover of darkness. Each piece of information was a threat, and Mysaria wove them into a tapestry that no one else could see. She never threatened, never boasted. She simply listened, remembered, and waited. In time, she began to trade in more than whispers. She offered safe passage for those who needed to disappear. She arranged meetings between parties who could never be seen together. She even, on rare occasions, provided a blade for a price. But always she remained in the shadows, her name spoken only in hushed tones, her face known to few. The lords of Westeros thought they understood power. They measured it in armies, gold, and dragons. Mysaria understood that true power was knowing what others did not want known. She never forgot the child she lost. That grief became a cold, hard stone in her chest, a reminder of what the world of princes and dragons had cost her. But she did not let it consume her. Instead, she let it sharpen her. Every secret she gathered, every favour she called in, every coin she hoarded, it was all a step toward the day when she would no longer be a pawn. She would be a player, and when that day came, it would not be with a lover's plea or a dancer's grace. It would be with a whisper in the ear of a queen, a shadow in the corner of a council chamber, a name that made even the boldest lord hesitate. The white worm had not been destroyed by the storm. She had been forged by it, and King's Landing, for all its arrogance, had no idea what was slithering beneath its feet. She returned to King's Landing with nothing but her own mind and the memory of a child lost at sea. The city that had once seen her as Daemon Targaryen's foreign mistress now saw something else entirely. A woman who had been stripped of every pretense, every protection, every claim to comfort. And in that stripping, Mysaria discovered a kind of freedom. She no longer needed to be desired. She no longer needed to be kept. She needed only to be useful, and to make herself indispensable to those who held power. But the power she sought was not the power of the throne room or the tawny field. It was a quieter kind, the kind that moves through shadows and whispers. And to build that power, she had to become a different kind of creature. Not a courtesan, not a consort, but a whisperer. Mysaria began where she had always been most at home, among the forgotten. She cultivated contacts among prostitutes, servants, sailors, thieves, guards, and frightened commoners. These were the people who carried messages between noble houses, who overheard arguments in the kitchens and the brothels, who saw powerful figures at their most careless. A lord might guard his words in the council chamber, but he would speak freely in the arms of a lover, or in the confidence of a trusted servant. And those servants, those lovers, those dockhands and night watchmen, they were the ones Mysaria learned to reach. She did not approach them with grand promises or noble titles. She came with coin, with protection, with the quiet assurance that she remembered their names. In a city where the small folk were invisible to the great houses, Mysaria made herself visible to them. She listened, she paid, and in return they brought her secrets. Her network was not built through banners or oaths, but through debt, fear, payment and mutual need. A whore in a street of silk brothel might owe her for a debt cleared. A sailor might fear her knowledge of his smuggling. A guard might accept a few silver stags for a word about who visited the Red Keep after dark. Each transaction was small, but together they formed a web that stretched across the capital. In a kingdom obsessed with bloodlines, Mysaria discovered that information has no noble birth. A stable boy's overheard conversation could be worth more than a lord's sworn testimony. A cook's gossip about a prince's appetite could reveal a weakness no maester had recorded. The truth did not care whether it came from a silk gown or a torn tunic. It only cared whether it was spoken, and whether someone was listening. Mysaria made herself that someone. She became a repository of whispers, a living ledger of the city's hidden movements. And as the dance of the dragons drew nearer, those whispers would become weapons. She would not ride a dragon, she would not command an army, but she would know what the dragons did not know. And that knowledge would make her as dangerous as any blade. The city of King's Landing, for all its stone and gold, was a city of mouths, and Mysaria learned to feed them, to starve them, to turn them toward whatever target she chose. She was no longer the woman who had been sent away in disgrace. She was the woman who had returned with nothing and built a kingdom of shadows from the ground up. She began to understand that the most valuable secrets were not the ones shouted in anger, but the ones whispered in fear. A man who confesses a crime to a priest may find absolution, but a man who confesses a weakness to a whore finds only leverage. Mysaria collected weaknesses the way a maester collects books, carefully, systematically, with an eye toward future use. She knew, for instance, that a certain knight of the Kingsguard had a taste for young boys, and that a certain lord of the small council had borrowed heavily from Lycene moneylenders to fund a mistress he could not afford. These were not secrets that could topple a dynasty on their own, but they were threads, and threads, when woven together, could bind a man's hands or hang him from a gibbet. As the court grew more fractured, Mysaris found herself drawn into the orbit of those who truly schemed. She did not seek the favour of the queen or the hand of the king. She sought the ear of the hand. Otto Hightower was a man who understood the value of whispers, even if he pretended to despise them. He had built his own network over decades, but his network was one of lords and maesters and septons. He did not see the servants. He did not hear the dockhands. And so when Mysaria began to feed him small truths, the name of a smuggler who brought weapons to the city, the location of a meeting between a Blackwood and a Bracken in a flea-bottom tavern, he took notice. He did not trust her. He was too shrewd for that. But he recognized her usefulness, and that was enough. She became a shadow at the edges of his councils, never seated at the table, but always present in the room. She learned to read the silences between words, to watch the flicker of an eye when a lie was told. She saw the way the greens and the blacks circled each other like wolves before a kill, each side gathering allies, each side hoarding secrets. And she knew that when the war came, and she knew it would come, the side that controlled the whispers would control the aftermath. So she kept building. She sent her people into the Dragonpit, not to steal eggs, but to listen to the dragon keepers complain about the beast's moods. She placed a girl in the kitchens of the Red Keep, who could tell her which dishes were sent back untouched, and which lords ate with nervous appetites. She bribed a septon in the Great Sept to record the confessions of the powerful, not for absolution, but for blackmail, and all the while, she remained invisible. A foreign woman of no name, no house, no dragon, but in the city of mouths, she had become the throat, and when the dance finally began, she would decide which whispers were heard, and which were swallowed forever. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, I'm curious, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let our global community know. And if you're finding this as mind-blowing as I am, hit that like button to help more people discover this story. The name did not come from her friends. It came from the people who had the most to lose. As Mysaria's influence grows, enemies give her the contemptuous name Lady Misery. It was not a title of honor, but a sneer, a way to diminish the power of a woman they could not understand. But the insult reflects the court's fear that a low-born foreign woman has gained access to people and secrets beyond their reach. And in that fear, Mysaria found a new kind of armor. You see, in King's Landing, names are currency. A name like Lady Misery carries weight. It tells a story before the woman herself even enters a room. It whispers of cold calculation, of a mind that works in shadows, of a person who knows things she should not know. The lords and ladies of the Red Keep used the name to wound her, to remind her that she was not one of them. But Mysaria understood something they did not. She understood that a reputation, even a terrible one, is a tool, and she learned to wield it. Mysaria's reputation becomes a weapon of its own. The more monstrous people believe her to be, more carefully they speak around her. A servant who might have gossiped about a lord's secret meeting now thinks twice, wondering if the pale woman with the knowing eyes has already heard. A knight who might have boasted of a dalliance now keeps his mouth shut, fearing that his words might find their way back to her. She did not need to threaten them directly. She only needed them to believe that she could. This is the genius of her survival. She turns the prejudices of Westeros into a cloak of intimidation. The court already looked down on her for her birth, for her profession, for the colour of her skin. They saw her as something foreign, something dangerous, something unclean, and she let them see exactly that. She did not try to prove them wrong. She did not try to charm them or win their approval. Instead, she amplified their fears. She became the monster they already believed her to be. And so the name Lady Misery stuck. It was spoken in hushed tones in the corridors of the Red Keep. It was whispered in the brothels of the Street of Silk, where her network of informants was most dense. It was muttered by merchants who knew she could ruin them with a single piece of information passed to the right ear. The name was meant to isolate her, to mark her as an outsider, but in the world she now inhabited, isolation was safety. The fewer people who understood her, the fewer people who could predict her, her network, which had begun as a loose collection of the overlooked and the forgotten, now grew into something far more deliberate. She did not just collect secrets, she learned to read the city itself. She knew which taverns were frequented by gold cloaks after their shifts. She knew which market stalls were used by servants of the great houses to pass messages. She knew the rhythm of the city's breath, the way its whispers travelled from the gutters to the throne room, and she knew that the most valuable information was never spoken aloud in court. It was spoken in the dark, between strangers, in moments of weakness. The court's fear of her was not entirely irrational. A low-born foreign woman with no name, no family, no lands, had somehow woven herself into the fabric of the capital's secret life. She had become a node through which information flowed. And in a kingdom built on bloodlines and oaths, that kind of power was deeply unsettling. The lords could not buy her loyalty. Because she had no price, they understood. They could not threaten her family. Because she had none they could reach, they could not exile her again. Because she had already returned from that exile stronger than before. So they called her Lady Misery, hoping the name would contain her. But names, like rumours, have a way of escaping the control of those who speak them. And Mysaria, the woman who had been sold, discarded, and broken, was now learning that the very things meant to destroy her would be turned into the foundation of her power. She was becoming something the court had never seen before, and she was only just beginning to understand what she could become. The city continued its slow turn toward war, and the whispers grew louder. But Mysaria was no longer just listening to the whispers. She was learning how to shape them, and in the shadows of the Red Keep, the name Lady Misery began to carry a new meaning. It was no longer just an insult, it was a warning. The name Lady Misery was never meant to flatter. It was a sneer, a dismissal, a way for the powerful to reduce a dangerous woman to a cruel joke. But names have a way of sticking, and in the courts of King's Landing, a name that sticks becomes a kind of currency. Mysaria understood this. She accepted the insult the way she accepted everything else in Westeros, as information, as fuel, and as she moved through the shadows of the Red Keep, gathering threads of rumour and confession, the kingdom itself was beginning to fracture in ways that would soon make her skills invaluable. The succession crisis begins long before swords are drawn. As King Viserys names his daughter Rhaenyra heir, it was a decision made in grief, in hope, and in defiance of centuries of tradition. Viserys had no living sons when he declared Rhaenyra his successor, and the lords of the realm swore oaths to support her. But oaths sworn in peace are often forgotten in the presence of a newborn prince. Viserys later fathers sons with Queen Alicent Hightower, creating two competing lines for the Iron Throne. The first son, Aegon, was named after the conqueror himself, a name that carried weight and expectation. With each new child born to Alicent, the court grew more divided. The Queen's father, Otto Hightower, had never fully accepted Rhaenyra's claim, and he saw in his grandsons a path to power that the realm's ancient customs supported. A daughter could inherit only if no true-born son existed. Now sons existed, and the question of who would sit the Iron Throne became a wound that would not heal. Mysaria watched the court divide into factions, understanding that every conflict creates new markets for secrets. She had no stake in the bloodlines of dragons, no loyalty to the old houses of Westeros. What she saw was a landscape of opportunity. The greens and the blacks, those who supported Alicent's children and those who supported Rhaenyra. Each needed eyes and ears beyond their own circles. Each needed someone who could move between worlds without being noticed. Mysaria had spent years learning how to be invisible in plain sight. Now that invisibility became her greatest asset, she did not choose a side quickly. That would have been foolish. Instead, she sold information to anyone who could pay, and she stored away the rest for future use. A whispered conversation between a Hightower lady and her handmaiden, a late-night argument between a Kingsguard and a serving boy, a letter passed through a brothel's back room. These fragments meant little alone, but together they formed a map of the court's hidden loyalties, and Mysaria was the only one who held the full map. Daemon, Rhaenyra's uncle and eventual husband, becomes a central figure in the struggle. He had always been a creature of chaos, restless and ambitious, never content with the role the crown assigned him. After his exile from Dragonstone, after the loss of the child he had hoped to claim, Daemon returned to the Stepstones and to war. But war alone could not satisfy him. He wanted the throne, or he wanted the woman who would one day claim it. His relationship with Rhaenyra was complicated, charged with blood and desire and shared defiance, and Mysaria understood him in ways few others did. She had seen him at his most vulnerable, had carried his child, had been cast aside and survived. That knowledge gave her a kind of power over him that no lord or lady could match. As the court splintered, Mysaria built her network with quiet precision. She recruited among the poorest, the most overlooked, the people who cleaned the floors and carried the water, and opened the gates at dawn. These were the ones who heard everything, and were never asked what they knew. She paid them in coin, in protection, in the simple dignity of being noticed, and they repaid her with loyalty that no oath sworn to a king could match. The Red Keep became a place of whispered conspiracies and unspoken alliances. King Viserys grew older, sicker, less able to hold his court together. His health declined, and with it, the fragile peace he had tried to maintain. The Greens gathered around the Queen and her children, preparing for a future that did not include Rhaenyra. The Blacks looked to Dragonstone, where the princess waited, surrounded by her own loyalists and her dragons. And in the spaces between them, Mysaria moved like a thread through a tapestry, binding the story together in ways no one yet understood. She knew that war was coming. Everyone with eyes and ears knew it, but knowing and preparing are different things. Mysaria prepared by gathering every secret she could find, by building relationships that crossed every boundary of class and allegiance, by becoming indispensable to those who would one day need her most. She did not seek glory or titles. She sought survival, and in a kingdom divided, survival belonged to those who could see the cracks before they became chasms. The court's division was not a sudden event. It was a slow poison administered over years, through every slight and every favour, every marriage and every broken promise. Mysaria watched it all. She catalogued the grievances, the resentments, the moments when a lord's loyalty shifted from one claimant to another. She knew which knights had been passed over for promotion, which ladies had been snubbed at court, which merchants had been cheated by the crown's tax collectors. These were the seeds of rebellion, and she tended them carefully. When King Viserys finally died, the realm would not have time to mourn. The succession would be contested before his body grew cold. But in the years before that moment, while the king still breathed, and the court still pretended at unity, Mysaria was already preparing for the war that would define her legacy. She was not a dragon rider. She carried no sword and wore no crown, but she understood something that the great houses often forgot. Power does not only live in castles and thrones. It lives in whispers, in secrets, in the quiet words exchanged between people who think no one is listening. And Mysaria was always listening. The succession crisis that divided the realm was not merely a dispute over inheritance. It was a fracture that would eventually split families, loyalties, and the very fabric of the kingdom. King Viserys I had named his daughter Rhaenyra his heir, but the birth of sons to Queen Alicent Hightower created a competing claim that grew more dangerous with each passing year. And in the midst of this growing tension, one man saw opportunity. Prince Daemon Targaryen had always been restless, ambitious, and unpredictable. He had been passed over as heir, exiled, and recalled. He had taken lovers, fought in wars, and earned a reputation as the most dangerous man in the Seven Kingdoms. But his ambition needed a vessel, and that vessel became Rhaenyra. Daemon eventually marries Rhaenyra Targaryen, binding his ambition to her claim for the throne. The marriage was controversial. Rhaenyra was already married to Lyonor Velaryon, but after Lynor's death, conveniently arranged or merely unfortunate, depending on which account you trust, she was free to wed her uncle. Daemon and Rhaenyra had long shared a bond of fire and blood, a connection that went beyond politics. But for Daemon, the marriage was also a strategic move. By wedding the heir to the Iron Throne, he placed himself at the centre of power. He would not be king consort in name only. He would be the prince who stood beside the queen, the sword that protected her claim, and the hand that would strike her enemies. Yet even as Daemon forged this new alliance, his past did not vanish. Mysaria's old relationship with Daemon does not disappear from the political landscape simply because he takes a royal wife. She had been his lover, his confidant, and the mother of his lost child. That history was not erased by a marriage ceremony. In the world of whispers and shadows that Mysaria had built, connections were currency, and her connection to Daemon was still valuable. It gave her a path back into the orbit of the Black faction, the faction that supported Rhaenyra's claim. Mysaria had returned to King's Landing after her exile, transformed by loss. She had built a network of informants among the lowborn, the forgotten, the people who moved unseen through the city. She knew the secrets of merchants, servants, and soldiers. She knew who could be bought and who could be broken. And she knew that Daemon Targaryen, for all his power, still had use for someone who could move where he could not. She is no longer merely Daemon's former lover. She is becoming a useful instrument in a coming war. The war had not yet begun in earnest, but the pieces were being set. On one side stood the Blacks, loyal to Rhaenyra. On the other stood the Greens, loyal to Queen Alicent and her son Aegon II. Between them lay a kingdom waiting to bleed, and in that waiting, Mysaria offered something invaluable: information. She knew the moods of the city, the loyalties of the gold cloaks, the whispers in the brothels and the docks. She could be a bridge between the court and the streets. Daemon remembered her skill. He remembered her cunning, and he remembered that she owed him nothing, except perhaps a debt of pain. The child she had lost on the narrow sea was his child too. That loss had hardened her, but it had also bound her to him in a way that neither marriage nor time could sever. So when Daemon needed eyes and ears in King's Landing, he turned to Mysaria, and she accepted. Her return to the Black faction was not a romantic reunion. It was a transaction of power. Mysaria would provide intelligence, and in return, she would gain protection, influence, and a place in the coming order. She would no longer be just a foreign whore or a spurned lover. She would be the white worm, coiled beneath the city, ready to strike when the time came. The alliance between Daemon and Rhaenyra was the foundation of the Black War effort. But beneath that foundation, in the dark spaces where power truly lived, Mysaria was already weaving her threads. She had learned that survival required more than strength. It required knowing when to speak and when to stay silent, when to offer a secret and when to hoard it. And as the realm moved closer to war, she would have many secrets to choose from. Daemon Targaryen and Rhaenyra Targaryen were now husband and wife, their alliance sealed in blood and fire, but the bond between them did not erase the past. Mysaria, the woman Daemon had once loved and then cast aside, remained in King's Landing, a ghost in the shadows of the Red Keep. She had returned from exile transformed, no longer a dancer or a courtesan, but a weaver of secrets, a collector of whispers. A network of informants stretched from the docks of the Mudgate to the servants' passages behind the throne room. And as the health of King Viserys I began to fail, those whispers grew louder, more urgent, and more dangerous. Viserys had been ailing for years, his body ravaged by the slow decay of a wasting illness. He was a king in name only, a hollow figure propped up on the Iron Throne, while his court fractured around him. Queen Alicent Hightower and her father, Otto Hightower, had long prepared for the moment of his death. They knew that Viserys had named Rhaenyra his heir, but they also knew that tradition, ambition, and the power of the Hightower family could challenge that decree. The king's bedchamber became a stage for a quiet, ruthless struggle. Alicent kept vigil, her eyes fixed on her husband's laboured breathing, while Otto moved through the corridors, giving orders in hushed tones. When Viserys I finally died, the court moved quickly to conceal the king's death and seize the throne. No bells were rung, no ravens were sent. The body was laid out in the royal chambers, and for a time, only a handful of people knew that the king had passed. Alicent and Otto understood that the longer they could keep the death secret, the more time they would have to secure the crown for Aegon, Alicent's eldest son. They needed to crown him before Rhaenyra could react, before the news reached Dragonstone and rallied the Black faction to war. And so, in the Great Sept of Baelor, with the High Septon presiding and the lords of the Green faction gathered in haste, Alicent's son Aegon II was crowned King of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men. The crown of Aegon the Conqueror was placed upon his head, and the crowd shouted his name. It was a coronation built on a lie, a stolen throne claimed before the rightful heir even knew her father was dead. The realm would soon learn that the king had passed. But by then, Aegon sat in the Red Keep, and the Green Council had already begun to govern. Rhaenyra, on Dragonstone, was denied the inheritance promised to her for decades. She had been named heir when she was a girl of 8, sworn to by every lord in the realm. Viserys had reaffirmed her claim again and again, even as Alicent bore him sons. But words on a throne room floor meant nothing when the swords and the gold and the whispers were all aligned against her. When the news finally reached Dragonstone, carried by a raven or a ship, Rhaenyra's world shattered. She was no longer the princess of Dragonstone waiting to ascend. She was a usurped queen, a woman forced to fight for what was hers. And in the chaos of that moment, Mysaria's world of rumour and covert movement suddenly became central to the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. The White Worm had spent years building a network that could hear a secret before it was spoken. She knew the mood of the city, the loyalties of the small folk, the movements of the gold cloaks. She knew which lords were wavering and which were committed. Her informants were everywhere. In the brothels where knights boasted, in the kitchens where servants gossiped, in the markets where merchants traded news along with goods. Now, with the throne stolen and war looming, that network was worth more than gold. Daemon remembered her usefulness. Rhaenyra would come to rely on her, and the Greens, if they had any sense, would fear her. The death of a king had set the stage for a war of succession. But before the armies marched and the dragons burned, there would be a darker deed, a crime born of grief and vengeance, a plot that would stain the dance of the dragons from its very beginning. And in that plot, Mysaria would play a role that no one could have foreseen. The death of King Viserys I did not remain a secret for long, but by the time the truth spread beyond the Red Keep, the Green faction had already crowned Aegon, the second in the throne room beneath the great iron chair. Queen Alicent Hightower and her father Sir Otto Hightower moved with precision, securing the treasury, the city watch, and the loyalty of most of the small council before Rhaenyra's supporters even knew the king had drawn his last breath. In the hours after the coronation, ravens flew from the capital, carrying sealed messages to every lord in the realm, proclaiming Aegon the rightful king by the will of the late Viserys, though that will had been twisted and rewritten in the Queen's chambers before the ink was dry. The civil war known as the Dance of the Dragons begins as a contest between rival Targaryen claimants, each backed by powerful houses and each commanding a portion of the realm's great dragons. Rhaenyra sat on Dragonstone, the ancient seat of her dynasty, and when the news reached her, she did not hesitate. She declared herself queen, called upon the lords who had sworn fealty to her years before, and prepared to take what was hers by blood and by oath. But the war would not be decided by oaths alone. Dragons provide unmatched destructive force, capable of turning castles to ash and armies to cinders in a single afternoon. Yet armies and dragons alone cannot govern a suspicious capital. King's Landing was a city of 500,000 souls, a labyrinth of narrow streets and crowded markets, of whispered conspiracies and shifting loyalties. The Greens held the throne, the treasury, and the court, but they did not hold the trust of the people, and they did not hold the shadows. Rhaenyra needed eyes within King's Landing, where her enemies controlled every lever of power. She needed someone who could move unseen, who understood the language of the streets, who knew which guards could be bought, and which servants overheard their master's secrets. She needed a whisperer, a broker of information, a creature of the dark spaces between the great houses. And in that need, she found Mysaria, the woman once known as Daemon's lover, now a force in her own right, a network of informants woven into the fabric of the capital. Mysaria was perfectly suited to the war that happens before battles, the war of messages, betrayal, and fear. She had spent years cultivating contacts among the prostitutes of the Street of Silk, the sailors in the dockside taverns, the kitchen girls who carried trays to the council chambers, the gold cloaks who patrolled the gates at night. These were the people who saw the lords when they thought no one was watching, who heard the arguments behind closed doors, who noticed the comings and goings of messengers and spies. Mysaria knew that power in a city like King's Landing did not flow from the Iron Throne alone. It flowed through the gutters and the alleys, through the whispers exchanged for copper coins, through the fear that kept mouths shut and eyes open. From Dragonstone, Rhaenyra sent word to Daemon, and Daemon in turn reached out to the woman he had once cast aside. Whatever bitterness remained between them, the war demanded pragmatism. Mysaria agreed to serve as the Queen's Mistress of Whisperers, though the title was never formally granted. She operated in the margins, a shadow without a banner, and her first task was to establish a reliable channel of communication between the Black faction on Dragonstone and the Loyalists still hiding within the capital. It was dangerous work. The Greens had their own spies, and the City Watch had been purged of anyone suspected of favouring Rhaenyra. One wrong word, one misplaced trust, and Mysaria's network could collapse, taking her life with it. But she had survived worse. She had crossed the narrow sea as a girl with nothing, had endured Daemon's whims and the court's contempt, had lost a child in a storm, and rebuilt herself from the wreckage. The War of Whispers was her element. She knew how to read a room by the tension in a servant's shoulders, how to spot an informant by the way they avoided eye contact, how to plant a rumour that would bloom into paranoia and division. The Greens might hold the throne, but they could not hold every secret. As the first weeks of the war unfolded, Mysaria began to feed intelligence to Dragonstone. She reported on the movements of the green dragons, on the mood of the small flock, on the fractures appearing in Aegon's court. She learned that Queen Alicent distrusted her own son's counsellors, that Sir Criston Cole was pushing for a swift military campaign, that the treasury was not as full as the Greens pretended. Every piece of information was a weapon, and Mysaria wielded them with the patience of a woman who had learned long ago that the loudest voices rarely win the longest wars. The dance of the dragons had begun with a crown placed on a usurper's head. But in the letters that never reached their destinations, in the alliances that crumbled before they could be forged, and at the centre of that invisible war stood Mysaria, the White Worm, burrowing deeper into the heart of the capital, waiting for the moment when her whispers would become the difference between victory and annihilation. The civil war had begun, but war is not fought only on battlefields or in the sky. Armies and dragons alone cannot govern a suspicious capital, and in King's Landing, the Green faction held the throne, while the Black faction gathered strength on Dragonstone. Both sides needed more than soldiers. They needed intelligence, leverage, and the kind of quiet violence that never makes it into the songs. It was in this fragile moment that the conflict turned personal. Prince Lucerys Velaryon, Rhaenyra's second son, was sent as a messenger to Storm's End. His task was to secure the allegiance of Lord Boros Baratheon, a powerful lord whose decision could tip the balance in the coming war. Lucerys flew on his young dragon Arax, a creature barely grown, and arrived at the great fortress expecting diplomacy. But at Storm's End, he found Aemon Targaryen already there. Aemond, the second son of Queen Alicent, rode Vhagar, the largest and most fearsome dragon alive. The two princes had history. Years earlier, a childhood fight had cost Lucerys one of his eyes, and Aemond had never forgotten the insult. Now in the hall of Storm's End, Aemon demanded satisfaction. Lord Baratheon refused to intervene, and Lucerys, sensing danger, fled into the stormy sky. What happened next is known to history as the death of a prince. Aemond pursued Lucerys on Vhagar, and above the raging sea, the two dragons clashed. Arax was no match for Vhagar. The older dragon tore the smaller one apart, and Lucerys fell to his death. The body was never recovered. That single event transformed a succession dispute into a blood feud. Lucerys was Rhaenyra's son, and his murder, for that is how the Black saw it, could not be answered with words. The war was no longer about a crown. It was about vengeance. When Daemon Targaryen learned of Lucerys' death, his response was cold and deliberate. He promised that a son would be answered with a son. It was not a threat made in the heat of grief. It was a calculation. Daemon understood that the Greens had struck first, and that the Black faction needed to respond in kind, not on a battlefield, but in the very heart of the enemy's stronghold. And that is where Mysaria became one of the key figures who could turn that promise into action inside enemy-held King's Landing. She had returned from her exile, and her network of informants, smugglers, and disaffected servants was already woven through the capital's underbelly. Daemon needed someone who could move unseen, who knew the secret passages and the loyalties of the city's lowest and most dangerous inhabitants. Mysaria was that person. She had no dragon, she carried no sword, but she possessed something more valuable in a war of shadows: access. She knew which guards could be bribed, which merchants traded in whispers, and which doors were left unlocked. Daemon's promise of a son for a son would require precision, secrecy, and a willingness to cross lines that even the most hardened knights might hesitate to approach. Mysaria was willing. The plan took shape in whispers. 2 men were chosen for the task: a former city watchman known as Blood and a rat catcher called Cheese. They were not noble, they were not honourable, they were tools, and Mysaria's intelligence would guide them through the labyrinth of the Red Keep. The target was not Aemond, the killer of Viserys. Daemon knew that vengeance had to strike where it would hurt most. At the heart of the Green Royal family, in the chambers of Queen Alicent and her children. And so, as the storm that had claimed Viserys faded into memory, a different kind of storm gathered inside the walls of King's Landing. Mysaria's network had already begun to map the movements of the royal household. The shifts of the guards, the habits of the servants, the promise of a son for a son was no longer just a threat. It was becoming a plan, and the White Worm was its architect. The night of the deed arrived, cloaked in fog and silence. Blood and Cheese moved through the secret passages that twisted beneath the Red Keep like veins in a stone body. Mysaria had given them the route, the passwords, and the exact location of the chambers where Queen Rhaenyra slept with her children. The Queen was not the target. The target was her son, the young Prince Jaehaerys, heir to the Green Throne after Aegon II. Blood was a brute, a man accustomed to violence, but Cheese was a rat catcher who knew the ways of the castle's hidden corners. Together, they crept past sleeping guards and locked doors, their footsteps muffled by the damp stone. They found the royal nursery without incident, and there, in the dim light of a dying candle, they saw the children. Rhaenyra woke to find a blade at her throat and a stranger's hand over her mouth. She was told to choose which of her sons would die. The choice was impossible, and the men made it for her. They took young Jaehaerys, a boy of 6 years, and ended his life in front of his mother. The Queen's screams brought guards, but by then the killers had vanished back into the passages, leaving behind a kingdom shattered by a single, calculated act of vengeance. The murder of Prince Jaehaerys sent shockwaves through the Red Keep. Queen Alicent wept openly in the throne room, her grief a raw and public wound. King Aegon II, already a reluctant ruler, was consumed by a rage that burned hotter than any dragon fire. He demanded retribution, but the Blacks had struck from the shadows, and there was no army to fight, no castle to besiege. The war had become a cycle of blood for blood, and the Greens now understood that their enemy would not play by the old rules of chivalry and honour. In Dragonstone, Rhaenyra received the news with a cold stillness that frightened even her closest advisors. She had lost a son, and now a son of her enemy had been taken in return. But there was no satisfaction in the justice of it. Only the hollow echo of grief multiplied. Daemon watched her from across the chamber, his face unreadable. He had kept his promise, but the cost was already mounting. The realm had seen a prince murdered in his bed, and the small folk whispered that the gods had turned their faces away from the Targaryens. Mysaria's role in the assassination did not go unnoticed by those who knew where to look. The White Worm had proven her worth, but she had also painted a target on her own back. The Greens put a price on her head, and the streets of King's Landing became a hunting ground for anyone suspected of loyalty to the Black cause. Yet Mysaria remained hidden, her network intact, her influence growing in the shadows, where the war would be decided as much by whispers as by steel. The death of Jaehaerys was a turning point, but it was not the end. It was only the beginning of a deeper, darker conflict that would consume the 7 kingdoms in fire and blood. The death of Prince Lucerys Velaryon above Storm's End did not merely escalate the Dance of the Dragons. It transformed a war of succession into a blood feud. For Rhaenyra Targaryen, the loss of her son was a wound that would never heal. For Daemon Targaryen, it was an insult that demanded an answer the Greens could not ignore. But Daemon was not a man to meet fire with fire alone. He understood that the most devastating blows are not always struck on the battlefield. Sometimes they land in the places where your enemy feels safest. And so Daemon turned his gaze toward King's Landing, the heart of the Green faction, the seat of the usurper Aegon II, and the city where the royal family believed themselves untouchable behind walls of stone and dragonfire. Daemon sought vengeance where the Greens believed themselves safest, within the royal capital itself. But to strike at the heart of the Red Keep, he needed more than a dragon and a sword. He needed eyes and ears inside the city. He needed someone who could move through the shadows of King's Landing without being seen. Someone who knew the hidden passages, the bribable guards, the servants who whispered secrets over supper. He needed the White Worm. Mysaria had spent years building her network in the capital. From the alleys of Fleabottom to the corridors of the Red Keep, her informants were everywhere. Cooks, washerwomen, grooms, and minor lords who owed favours or feared exposure. She knew the rhythms of the royal household, the schedules of the Kingsguard, the habits of the Queen Dowager and her children. It was a kind of knowledge that could not be bought overnight. It had to be cultivated, thread by thread, over years of patient observation. And now Daemon came to her with a request that would turn that knowledge into a weapon. Mysaria served as a go-between, connecting royal rage to the city's criminal world. She was the bridge between Daemon's fury and the men who could carry out his darkest wish. The plot that followed depended on intimate knowledge of hidden passages, guards, servants, and the habits of the royal household. It was the kind of operation only someone with deep roots in the underworld could help make possible. Mysaria had those roots. She knew which gaolers could be bribed, which turnkeys looked the other way, and which men had nothing left to lose. From the depths of the city's dungeons, 2 men were selected. Their names would become infamous: Blood and Cheese. Blood was a former member of the City Watch, a man who knew the layout of the Red Keep and the routines of its defenders. Cheese was a rat catcher, a lowly figure who moved through the castle's service passages unnoticed, a man who knew where the royal children slept and when the guards changed their watch. Together, they formed an unlikely but deadly pair, one with the muscle and the other with the access. Mysaria's role was not to wield the blade, but to ensure the blade reached its target. She arranged the meeting, passed the instructions, and provided the intelligence that made the strike possible. Daemon's vengeance would be exacted not in open battle, but in the quiet of a bedchamber, in the heart of the enemy's stronghold. The Greens had celebrated Lucerys's death as a victory. They would soon learn that every victory carries a price, and that Daemon Targaryen was willing to pay it in blood. The plan took shape in whispers and coded messages. Mysaria's network ensured that no word of the conspiracy reached the ears of Lord Larys Strong, the Greens' own master of whisperers. The White Worm had learned to move in silence, and she taught her agents to do the same. By the time Blood and Cheese slipped into the Red Keep, the trap was already set. The road to that terrible night was paved with intelligence, patience, and the cold precision of a woman who had spent her life learning how to survive in a world that wanted her dead. The night of the deed arrived, cloaked in shadow and silence. Blood and Cheese moved through the secret passages that spiderwebbed beneath the Red Keep. Passages known only to a handful of souls, builders long dead, maesters sworn to discretion, and those who had paid dearly for the knowledge. Cheese led the way, his small frame slipping through gaps that would have stopped a larger man. He knew every turn, every loose stone, every creaking floorboard that could betray a footstep. Behind him came Blood, a hulking figure whose presence seemed to fill the narrow tunnels. his breath steady, his hand resting on the hilt of a blade that had tasted blood before. Their target was not the usurper king himself. That would have been too bold, too uncertain. Aegon II was guarded by the finest knights of the Kingsguard, his chambers warded with locks and spells, and the constant vigilance of men who had sworn their lives to his protection. No, Daemon had chosen a more precise strike, a wound that would cut deeper than any sword thrust to the king's heart. They sought the queen, Rhaenyra Targaryen, and her children, not to kill the queen herself, though that would have been a prize, but to take from Aegon what he had taken from Rhaenyra, a child. The royal apartments were quiet when they emerged from a hidden door behind a tapestry. The hearth had burned down to embers, casting a dim orange glow across the chamber. In the adjoining room, a nursemaid dozed in a chair, her head lolling against the wall. Cheese moved past her like a ghost, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. He found the bed where the children slept. Two small forms beneath a coverlet of velvet and fur. The elder was Prince Jaehaerys, the heir to the Green Throne, a boy of 6 years with his mother's silver hair and his father's stubborn chin. Beside him lay his sister, Princess Rhaenyra, younger by a year, her tiny hand clutching a cloth doll. Blood's hand closed over the boy's mouth. Before he could cry out, the child's eyes flew open, wide with terror, but the sound was smothered. Cheese bound his wrists with a length of rope, quick and practiced, while the nursemaid stirred but did not wake. They dragged the prince from his bed, his bare feet scrabbling against the cold stone floor. The girl remained asleep, oblivious to the nightmare unfolding beside her. They brought the boy to the queen's chambers. Rhaenyra was awake, sitting by a window with a book in her lap, her eyes distant and dreaming as they often were. She looked up when the door opened, and her face went white as milk. She knew them for what they were before they spoke. Killers, sent from the black heart of the war. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Cheese grinned, showing yellowed teeth, and said the words that would echo through history. "Your son, your grace, a life for a life," Rhaenyra begged. She offered gold, jewels, her own life in exchange for the boys. But Blood and Cheese had their orders. Daemon had been clear, an eye for an eye, a son for a son. The queen's pleas fell on ears that had long since gone deaf to mercy. In the end, she was forced to choose which of her children would die, a cruelty that Daemon had calculated with cold precision. The queen's mind, already fragile, shattered in that moment. She named the younger boy Prince Maelor, but he was not in the room. The killers had already taken Jaehaerys, and so the blade fell. The death of Prince Jaehaerys sent a shockwave through the 7 kingdoms. It was not a battle, not a duel, not an honourable death in the service of a cause. It was murder in the dark, a child butchered in his mother's sight. The Greens howled for vengeance. Aegon II wept with rage and grief, his hatred for Rhaenyra and Daemon crystallising into something cold and absolute. The small folk of King's Landing whispered in fear, for they knew that the war had come home, that no wall could keep out the shadows that now stalked the city. And in the shadows, Mysaria watched. She had done her part, delivered the blow that Daemon had demanded, but she also knew that such deeds have consequences. The blood of a prince stained her hands as surely as it stained the hands of Blood and Cheese. The white worm had become a serpent with a taste for royal venom, and there was no turning back. The dance of the dragons had entered its darkest phase, and the dance would not end until the dragons themselves were ash and memory. The previous chapter traced the road that led from Lucerys Velaryon's death to the hiring of 2 killers. Now we arrive at the destination, and it is a room in the Red Keep, where a mother and her children are about to face a nightmare that no amount of stone walls or sworn swords could prevent. The killers known as Blood and Cheese infiltrate the Red Keep and confront Queen Rhaenyra and her children. They force Rhaenyra into an impossible choice before murdering young Prince Jaehaerys. This is the chapter of the assassination itself. The moment when the war's nature shifts from a conflict between armies and dragons to something far more intimate and cruel. Blood and Cheese did not enter the castle through any grand gate. They moved through passages that the court preferred to forget, tunnels, and forgotten service ways that Mysaria's network had mapped with the precision of a spider charting its web. The Red Keep is a fortress built over older structures, and those older structures have secrets. A man who knows those secrets can walk from a brothel in the Street of Silk to the royal apartments without ever seeing the sun. That is what Blood and Cheese did. The Queen's chambers were not heavily guarded that night. The Greens had won the crown, and the city was theirs. Why would anyone expect an attack from within? The killers found Rhaenyra in bed with her children, her twins Viserys and Rhaenyra, and her younger son Maelor. The children were small, the twins only 6 years old. Maelor was barely 2. What happened next is recorded in the chronicles as one of the most deliberate acts of terror in the history of the Targaryen dynasty. Blood and Cheese did not simply kill the prince. They forced Rhaenyra to choose which of her sons would die. They gave her an impossible choice, a mother's worst torment made real. She could not choose. She could not speak. And when she could not choose, they made the decision for her. They murdered young Prince Viserys in front of his mother and his sister. The assassination is one of the most horrifying crimes of the dance, shattering any remaining illusion of chivalric warfare. Before that night, the war had been fought with dragons and armies, with sieges and battles. There had been deaths, certainly, but they were the deaths of soldiers and the deaths of princes in combat. Viserys had died at Storm's End, but that was a confrontation between dragon riders. This was different. This was a child killed in his bed, in the heart of the Red Keep, by men who had been paid to send a message. The message was clear. Daemon Targaryen had struck where the Greens believed themselves safest. He had reached into the castle and taken what mattered most, and he had done it through the information and the connections that Mysaria had provided. Mysaria's association with the plot binds her name forever to the war's darkest act of vengeance. She is the one who found the killers. She is the one who knew the passages. She is the one who understood that the Red Keep's security was only as strong as its weakest forgotten door. Without her, the plan might have remained a fantasy, a wish for revenge that could never be fulfilled. With her, it became a reality that would haunt the Targaryen dynasty for the rest of its days. The aftermath of Blood and Cheese was chaos in King's Landing. The Greens could not believe that the attack had happened. They searched for the killers, but Blood and Cheese had already vanished back into the city's underworld. The court was terrified. If the Queen's chambers were not safe, then nowhere in the Red Keep was safe. The war had come home in a way that no one had anticipated, and the war itself changed. The assassination of Viserys hardened the Greens' resolve. They would not negotiate. They would not compromise. They would fight until the Blacks were destroyed. The Dance of the Dragons became a war of extermination, a conflict in which both sides believed that the other must be utterly annihilated. That is the legacy of Blood and Cheese. But the story does not end with the murder. The killers were not the only ones involved. Mysaria had set the plan in motion, and she would continue to operate in the shadows of King's Landing, feeding information to Rhaenyra's cause. The war would drag on, and her network would grow. She had proven her worth, but she had also proven that she was willing to do anything to win. The next phase of the conflict would see Rhaenyra finally take the capital. But the crown she would wear would be a heavy one, stained with the blood of children, and Mysaria would be there, watching, waiting, always the white worm in the walls. The murder of Prince Viserys is not the end of a plot. It is the beginning of a new kind of war. Blood and Cheese does not simply punish the Greens, it poisons the entire conflict. The act transforms the Dance of the Dragons from a political dispute into something far more personal, far more brutal. And at the center of this transformation, standing in the shadows of the Red Keep, is Mysaria. In the immediate aftermath of the killing, the Red Keep descends into a state of shock and terror. Queen Rhaenyra, who was forced to choose which of her sons would die, is shattered. She had watched a man hold a blade to her daughter's throat, while another man dragged her son away. She had heard the thud of the axe, the wet sound that followed, and she had seen the head presented to her mother, Queen Alicent, as proof of the deed. Helena's mind, already fragile, breaks under the weight of that night. She will never be the same. She retreats into herself, speaking only in riddles and fragments, a ghost haunting the halls of her own home. The Greens have lost a prince, but they have also lost the Queen's sanity. The Green faction does not simply mourn, they seize upon the murder as a weapon. The image of a child killed in his bed, his mother forced to watch, becomes a rallying cry. The Blacks, they say, are not fighting for a throne, they are fighting to exterminate a family. The cruelty of blood and cheese is not just a crime, it is a symbol. Every lord who hears the story, every small folk who whispers it in the markets, sees the Greens as victims and the Blacks as monsters. Daemon's vengeance has achieved exactly what he intended. It has wounded the Greens deeply, but it has also given them a story that will justify their own cruelties for the rest of the war. Daemon himself does not seem to understand the cost of his victory. He sits on Dragonstone, perhaps satisfied, perhaps already moving on to the next scheme. But the war is no longer his to control. The murder of a child changes the rules. It invites retaliation, and retaliation will not be limited to the battlefield. The Greens will now feel justified in striking at Rhaenyra's family in kind. The cycle of revenge has been set in motion, and Daemon has lit the fuse. What is often forgotten in the telling of this story is that the men who carried out the murder were not lords or knights. Blood was a former gold cloak, a man who had once served the city watch. Cheese was a rat catcher, a low-born man who knew the tunnels of the Red Keep better than any noble. They were not soldiers fighting for a cause. They were hired killers, paid in gold and promises. Daemon's vengeance demonstrates that royal wars are often carried out by people who will never sit the throne. The decisions of kings and queens are executed by those who have nothing to lose and everything to gain from the chaos. Blood and cheese will not be remembered as heroes or villains in the histories. They will be footnotes, tools used by greater powers. But their hands did the work, and that is where Mysaria's role becomes terrifyingly clear. She is the one who connected Daemon to these men. She is the one who knew where to find a disgraced gold cloak and a rat catcher with a grudge. She is the one who understood the geography of the Red Keep, the schedules of the guards, the habits of the Queen. Without her, the plot would have remained a fantasy, a bitter wish for revenge that could never be fulfilled. But Mysaria's intelligence network made it real. She turned a desire for blood into a plan, and she turned that plan into a death. Mysaria's role shows the terrifying reach of intelligence networks when they are directed toward murder. She does not wield a sword. She does not ride a dragon. She does not sit on a council or command armies. But she knows who to pay, who to threaten, and who to trust. Her power is invisible, and that is what makes it so dangerous. The Greens will search for the killers, but they will never find the woman who set them on their path. She remains in the shadows, watching, waiting for the next opportunity to serve her queen. In the days that follow, King's Landing becomes a city of whispers and suspicion. The small folk speak of the murder in hushed tones. The nobles lock their doors and check their guards. The Red Keep, once a symbol of Targaryen power, now feels like a cage. Queen Alicent mourns her grandson, but she also seethes with rage. She will not forget, she will not forgive, and she will use this death to fuel the war effort, to rally the banners, to ensure that the Blacks pay for every drop of blood they have spilled. But Helaena remains the truest victim. She is the one who must live with the memory of that night. She is the one who must look at her remaining children and wonder if they will be next. She is the one who must sleep in the same chambers where her son was taken. Her grief is not a weapon. It is a wound that will never heal, and in her madness, she may see truths that others cannot. She may speak prophecies that no one understands, but she will never again be the queen she was before. The war continues. The armies march. The dragons take flight. But the murder of Viserys has changed everything. It has lowered the threshold for atrocity. It has shown both sides that no one is, not even children in their beds, and it has given Mysaria a new kind of influence, one that will only grow as the conflict deepens. She is no longer just Daemon's former lover or a whisper in the shadows. She is the architect of a crime that will echo through the rest of the war, and she is just getting started. The murder of Prince Jaehaerys did not simply punish the Greens, it poisoned the entire conflict. Queen Rhaenyra was broken by the murder of her son, while the Green faction gained a powerful symbol of black cruelty. But symbols, however potent, do not win wars. Armies and dragons do. And as the war shifted, Rhaenyra and her supporters eventually seized King's Landing. The path to the capital was not a single battle, but a campaign of attrition and betrayal. The Greens held the Red Keep, but their grip on the city had never been absolute. The small folk, always fickle, grew restless under the burden of war. Food became scarce. Prices rose. The crown's gold, once spent freely on tourneys and feasts, now flowed only to soldiers and sellswords. The city simmered with resentment, and that resentment was a resource Mysaria knew how to exploit. She had spent years building her network in King's Landing. The White Worm's informants were everywhere. In the kitchens of the Red Keep, in the brothels of the Street of Silk, in the markets where the hungry gathered to curse the Queen, who had never shown them her face. Mysaria did not need to love the small folk to understand them. She understood hunger, she understood fear, and she understood that a city held by fear alone is a city waiting to fall. When Rhaenyra's forces finally approached the capital, the Green Council fractured. King Aegon II, never a steady hand, fled the city rather than face the dragon riders who had come for his throne. His mother, Queen Alicent, remained behind, perhaps hoping to negotiate, perhaps simply too proud to run. But negotiation was not what Rhaenyra offered. She offered conquest. The gates of King's Landing opened without a siege. The gold cloaks, the city watch that Daemon had once commanded, switched sides as easily as they had sworn to the Greens. The small folk, seeing the banners of the Black Dragon, did not resist. They had no love for Rhaenyra, but they had less love for the Queen who had let them starve. And so the Queen finally occupied the Iron Throne she had fought to claim. Rhaenyra Targaryen, first of her name, sat in the seat of Aegon the Conqueror. The hall was the same, the throne was the same, but the city she inherited was unstable and hostile. The capital was crowded with hungry small folk, suspicious nobles, defeated enemies, and hidden loyalties. The conquest had been swift. The control would not be. Rhaenyra's reign began with a show of mercy. She did not execute Alicent or the captured Green Lords. She did not order a purge of the court. She wanted to rule, not simply to punish. But mercy, in a city that had been at war with itself, was easily mistaken for weakness. The Green faction supporters did not vanish. They went underground. They smiled at the new queen while sharpening knives in the dark. And that was where Mysaria became more valuable than ever, because conquest is easier than control. Taking a city requires dragons and soldiers. Holding a city requires eyes and ears. Rhaenyra needed to know who among her new subjects was loyal, who was plotting, who was whispering in the shadows. She needed someone who could read the city's secrets, the way a maester reads a scroll. Mysaria had always been that someone, but now she was no longer a mere informant, a go-between for Daemon's darker impulses. She became the Queen's Mistress of Whisperers, the unofficial intelligence chief of the Black Regime. It was a role she had earned through years of survival, through the network she had woven thread by thread in the brothels and alleys of the capital. She knew the city's pulse. She knew which lords could be bought, which merchants were smuggling goods, which priests were preaching rebellion in the name of the old gods or the new. But the capital was not the only place where secrets mattered. The war continued beyond the walls. The Greens had not surrendered, they had regrouped, and Rhaenyra's hold on the throne depended not only on the loyalty of King's Landing, but on the loyalty of the great houses the dragon riders, and the armies that marched in her name. Mysaria's information network became the Queen's most reliable weapon in a war that was fought as much with whispers as with steel. She warned Rhaenyra of plots before they could take root. She identified the disloyal before they could strike. She gave the Queen a semblance of control in a city that was always one spark away from chaos. But control, like conquest, is never absolute. The small folk who had opened the gates for Rhaenyra did not suddenly love her. They had simply chosen the lesser evil. And as the war dragged on, as the dragon fights grew more desperate and the casualties mounted, the city's hunger would not be satisfied by a queen on a throne. It would demand blood. Mysaria understood that better than most. She had been born in the gutters of Liz. She had crawled her way up through the filth of King's Landing. She knew that the throne was not a destination. It was a perch, and perches could be knocked over. For now, though, the White Worm had never been more powerful. She stood at the Queen's side, not as a noble or a dragon rider, but as the one who saw what others could not. And in a city full of enemies, that was the most dangerous kind of power. I hope you're as amazed by this as I am. If you want to stay updated on more content like this, make sure to subscribe and join our community of curious minds. Trust me, what's coming next will challenge everything you thought you knew. When Rhaenyra Targaryen finally took the Iron Throne, she did not simply inherit a crown. She inherited a city that had been held by her enemies for the better part of a year. King's Landing was not a prize that could be won by armies alone. It was a living thing, a body of stone and timber and flesh, and like any living thing, it had a pulse. The question for the new queen was not whether she could hold the Red Keep, but whether she could understand the city itself, and that was a kind of knowledge no lord, no knight, no maester could provide. This is where Mysaria became indispensable. Under Rhaenyra's rule, Mysaria functions as an unofficial mistress of whisperers. She has no formal title, no seat on the small council, no sigil to display, but she has something far more valuable. In a war fought with shadows as much as swords, she has eyes everywhere. Her agents move through taverns, brothels, markets, docks and servant corridors, gathering the news formal officials cannot reach. These are not spies in the traditional sense. They are not trained in the arts of disguise or coded messages. They are barmaids who overhear a drunken soldier's complaint. They are fishmongers who notice which ships are unloading cargo at odd hours. They are chambermaids who see which doors are opened at night and which are kept locked. Mysaria has built her network not from gold or fear, but from the simple truth that the lowborn are invisible to the powerful, and the invisible see everything. What she offers the Queen is a form of power Rhaenyra's nobles often lack. An understanding of the city's pulse. The lords of Westeros know how to command armies. They know how to negotiate with other lords. But they do not know how to read the mood of a crowd in Flea Bottom. They do not know which baker has stopped selling bread on credit, or which blacksmith has begun sharpening old swords in secret. These are the details that matter when a city is starving, when a population is restless, when the enemy may be hiding not behind castle walls, but among the faces in the market square. Mysaria understands this because she has lived it. She came to King's Landing as an outsider, a foreigner with nothing but her wits and her will. She knows what it means to be hungry, to be afraid, to be desperate, and she knows that desperation is the most reliable currency in any city. A man who has nothing to lose will do almost anything for a few coins. A woman who fears for her children will trade any secret to keep them safe. Mysaria does not judge these people. She simply employs them. In this role, Mysaria resembles later masters of intelligence, building influence from a web rather than a sword. There is a name that will echo through the history of Westeros centuries from now. Brynden Rivers, the man known as Lord Bloodraven, who would one day serve as the master of whisperers for another Targaryen king. Bloodraven's network of spies and informants would become legendary, a shadow government that stretched across the Seven Kingdoms. But Mysaria built something similar first. in a time when the realm was tearing itself apart. She did it without the authority of a royal appointment, without the resources of the crown, without the legitimacy of a noble name. She did it with nothing but her own cunning and the trust of those who had no one else to turn to. The difference between Mysaria and the spy masters who would follow her is not one of skill but of circumstance. Bloodraven operated from a position of power, backed by the Iron Throne and the full weight of the royal treasury. Mysaria operated from the margins, always one step away from being cast out, always aware that her influence depended on the goodwill of a queen who could withdraw her favour at any moment. This precariousness shaped everything she did. She could not afford to be careless. She could not afford to be sentimental. She could not afford to be anything less than essential, and essential she became. In the weeks and months after Rhaenyra's coronation in King's Landing, Mysaria's reports shaped the Queen's decisions in ways that the Lords of the Black Council could barely comprehend. When Rhaenyra learned that the city's granaries were nearly empty, it was Mysaria who told her which merchants were hoarding grain and which were willing to sell at a fair price. When the Queen worried about the loyalty of the gold cloaks, it was Mysaria who knew which captains could be trusted and which had been bought by the Greens long ago. When the small folk began to murmur against the new regime, it was Mysaria who brought the whispers to the throne room before they could grow into shouts. But the information Mysaria gathered was never neutral. It came with the perspective of the streets, the perspective of the poor, the perspective of those who had been crushed under the wheels of power for generations. She saw the war not as a clash of noble houses, as a disaster that fell hardest on those who had no dragons, no armies, no voice. And she reported what she saw without the filter of courtly politeness. This made her invaluable to Rhaenyra, but it also made her dangerous. The truth, when spoken plainly, is not always welcome. There is a tension that runs through this period of Rhaenyra's reign, a tension between the Queen's desire to rule justly and the harsh realities of a city at war. Rhaenyra wanted to be loved by the people of King's Landing. She wanted to be seen as a legitimate monarch, a protector, a mother to the realm. But the realm was not in a mood to be mothered. The city was hungry, the war was expensive, and the Queen's dragons, once symbols of Targaryen power, had become instruments of terror that reminded the small folk of how fragile their lives truly were. Mysaria understood this better than anyone. She had seen what dragons could do. She had felt the heat of their fire from the ground, not from the saddle. And she knew that the people of King's Landing did not fear the Greens or the Blacks. They feared the flames. They feared the next raid, the next battle, the next dragon descending from the sky to burn their homes and their families. The war was not a noble struggle to them. It was a plague that had descended upon their city, and they would endure it however they could. This is the world in which Mysaria operates. She is not a queen. She is not a lady. She is not a warrior. She is a woman who has learned to survive in a city that devours the weak, and she has turned that survival into a form of power that the mighty cannot touch. Her web is invisible, her influence is quiet, but it is real and it is growing. And as the war continues to shift, as new threats emerge from the shadows, as the Queen's grip on the city becomes more uncertain, with each passing day, Mysaria's network will become more important than ever. The whispers she gathers will not only inform the Queen's decisions, they will determine who lives, who dies, and who pays the price for a conflict that has already cost too much. The city breathes, the city watches, and the White Worm listens. Rhaenyra Targaryen finally sits the Iron Throne, but the seat of power in King's Landing has never been more uncomfortable. The crown she claimed at such great cost now rests on a head that must constantly turn, watching for threats from every shadow, and the shadows in this city are deep and numerous. The previous chapter saw Mysaria rise to become Rhaenyra's unofficial Mistress of Whisperers, a network of informants threading through every layer of the capital. But gathering information is one thing. knowing what to do with it, and more importantly, knowing how to interpret the mood of a city, is quite another. Rhaenyra's rule in King's Landing is burdened by war taxes, shortages, executions, and deepening public resentment. The treasury is strained from funding a war that has already consumed so much. Food supplies dwindle as the conflict disrupts trade routes and farming seasons, and the executions, the constant public reminders of what happens to those who oppose the Queen, have begun to turn the thumbs of even loyal subjects. The small folk of King's Landing are not a unified mass. They are individuals, families, people with their own histories and grievances, but they share one thing in common. They live in a city packed behind walls, and in such close quarters, fear travels faster than any raven. Mysaria understands that the small folk are not a faceless mass. They are an audience shaped by rumour and hunger, every whispered word in a tavern, every complaint muttered in a breadline, every glance exchanged between neighbours carries meaning. And when the stomach is empty, when the taxes take what little remains, when the heads of executed men and women decorate the city gates, that audience becomes restless. The White Worm sees the danger coming, even when dragon lords remain focused on noble betrayals. While Rhaenyra and her advisors debate the loyalty of this lord or that house, Mysaria watches the streets. She sees the women who must choose between feeding their children and paying the crown's demands. She hears the men who once cheered for Rhaenyra, now muttering curses under their breath. She knows that a city under siege from within is more dangerous than any army camped outside its walls. Her warnings reveal how quickly fear can become anger in a city packed behind walls. She brings these observations to Rhaenyra, not as abstract reports but as urgent counsel. The Queen must understand that the throne she occupies is not just a symbol of power, it is a target, and the arrows aimed at it are not all made of steel. Mysaria speaks of the shortages in the markets, the rising prices of grain, the way the war has choked the city's supply lines. She tells Rhaenyra that the executions meant to demonstrate strength are instead breeding resentment. Each public death is a seed planted in fertile soil, and the harvest will be rebellion. But Rhaenyra is consumed by the politics of the noble houses. She sees the Greens as her true enemies, the lords who abandoned her as traitors to be punished. The small folk, in her mind, are background noise, the chorus that cheers or boos but never truly shapes the drama. This is the blindness of those born to power. They see the world from above, from the heights of Dragonback and the elevation of the Red Keep. They forget that the city below is a living thing, a creature of flesh and bone and hunger. And when that creature grows desperate, it will turn on anyone who sits above it. Mysaria knows this because she came from below. She was born in the gutters of Lys, or perhaps the distant shores of Yeti, depending on which version of her story you believe. She has known hunger, she has known fear, she has known what it means to be invisible to those who rule. And she knows that the invisible can become deadly when they decide they have nothing left to lose. The war taxes fall hardest on those who can least afford them. The shortages mean that the poor go without, while the rich hoard what remains. The executions are a daily reminder that the new Queen's justice is swift and merciless, and the rumours, the endless rumours that swirl through the city like smoke, paint Rhaenyra as a tyrant who cares nothing for the suffering of her people. Some of these rumours are spread by green agents, loyalists who still hope to see Aegon II restored, but many of them are simply the natural product of a city under strain. When people are afraid, they talk, and when they talk, they create stories, and those stories, once born, take on a life of their own. Mysaria tries to counter this. Her network works to spread favourable tales, to remind the small folk that Rhaenyra is the rightful queen, that the war was forced upon her, that the Greens are the true villains. But truth is a fragile thing in a city of whispers, and the truth of an empty belly is louder than any propaganda. The Queen's court remains focused on the great game of thrones. They debate alliances and strategies. They plan military campaigns, They plot against their enemies, but Mysaria watches the streets, and she sees the storm clouds gathering. She warns Rhaenyra that the city is a tinderbox, that the smallest spark could ignite a fire that would consume them all. She urges the queen to show mercy, to lower the taxes, to feed the hungry, but Rhaenyra is trapped by the logic of war. She cannot afford mercy when her enemies are still at large. She cannot lower taxes when the treasury is empty. She cannot feed the hungry when the grain stores are depleted. And so the resentment deepens. The small folk begin to see Rhaenyra not as their queen, but as their oppressor. They remember that she is a Targaryen, and they remember that Targaryens have always ruled through fire and blood. They begin to wonder if the Greens might be better after all. At least Aegon II, for all his faults, did not tax them into starvation. Mysaria knows that this is the most dangerous moment, when the people begin to compare their current suffering with the memory of a past that may not have been as good as they remember. They become willing to risk everything for change. They become revolutionaries, not out of ideology, but out of desperation. She brings these warnings to Rhaenyra again and again. She speaks of the mood in the streets, the growing hostility, the way the queen's name is now spoken with contempt rather than reverence. She tells Rhaenyra that the city is not secure, that the walls of the Red Keep cannot protect her from the anger of the people. But Rhaenyra is a dragon rider. She has been raised to believe that dragons are the ultimate power, that no army of commoners can stand against dragonfire. She listens to Mysaria's warnings, but she does not truly hear them. She cannot imagine that the small folk, the same people who once cheered her father, could ever pose a real threat. And so the days pass. The war continues. The taxes remain. The executions go on. And the resentment grows, silent and patient, like a worm in the heart of the city. Mysaria watches it all. She sees the danger coming, even when those around her remain blind. She knows that the Dragon Lords are focused on the wrong enemies, that the real threat is not in the castles of the Greens, but in the streets of King's Landing. She knows that when the storm finally breaks, it will not discriminate between the guilty and the innocent. It will consume everything in its path. The White Worm has always survived by seeing what others miss. She has survived exile, loss, and the cruelty of those more powerful than her. She has built a network of information that rivals any in the Seven Kingdoms. But information is not power. Power is the ability to act on that information, to change the course of events before they become disasters. And Mysaria, for all her knowledge, cannot change the course of this river. She can only watch as it carries them all toward the falls. The resentment that had been simmering beneath the surface of King's Landing for months finally found its breaking point. It did not come as a single organized rebellion. It came as a wave, a flood, a force of nature that no crown, no dragon, and no army could have predicted or controlled. The capital finally erupted as the people turned against the regime ruling from the Red Keep. Rhaenyra's rule had been a constant struggle from the moment she took the throne. The city was starving. The war had drained the treasury, and the taxes she imposed to fund her campaign fell hardest on those who could least afford them. The small folk who had once cheered her arrival now watched her pass in silence or with muttered curses. The executions of those suspected of green loyalties had not made the city safer. They had only filled the air with the smell of blood and fear. Mysaria had been watching this transformation closely. A network of informants, the same web of whispers that had served her since her days in the pleasure houses of Lys, was still intact. The servants who cleaned the kitchens, the whores who serviced the gold cloaks, the merchants who sold watered ale in the flea-bottom taverns. They all spoke to her, or to someone who spoke to her. She knew the city's pulse better than any maester or lord, and in the days before the riot, that pulse had become erratic, feverish. Mysaria warned Rhaenyra of the gathering danger, proving that her network still heard the city's movements before the court did. She came to the queen not with rumours, but with reports. The price of bread had doubled in a week. A shipment of grain from the Reach had been seized by green forces before it could reach the capital. The people were beginning to blame Rhaenyra for their hunger. Not the war, not blockade, but the woman on the Iron Throne. Rhaenyra listened, but she did not act. Perhaps she could not believe that the people she had come to liberate would turn against her. Perhaps she was too focused on the war, on the threat of Aegon II's return, on the endless council meetings that produced nothing but more taxes and more executions. Whatever the reason, the warning was not heeded. The riot began in the morning, in the fish market along the river gate. A group of women, angry that the day's catch had been commandeered for the royal household, began to shout. The gold cloaks arrived to disperse them, but the crowd did not scatter. It grew. More people came from the alleys and hovels of the city, drawn by the noise and the anger. By midday, the mob had swelled to thousands. They did not march on the Red Keep. They did not demand an audience with the Queen. They simply began to destroy. Shops were looted. Homes were burned. The Dragonpit, that great stone temple where the Targaryen dragons were housed, became a target. The people remembered that dragons had brought fire and death to the fields of the Reach, to the towns of the Riverlands. They saw the beasts as symbols of the tyranny that had starved them. The riot became a disaster beyond the control of any single faction, soldier, or dragon. The gold cloaks were overwhelmed. The Knights of the Kingsguard could not restore order. Even the dragons, when they were unleashed, only made the chaos worse. Syrax, the dragon of the late King Viserys, was loosed from the Dragonpit, but the mob did not flee. They threw stones and torches, and the great beast, confused and enraged, began to attack indiscriminately. Buildings collapsed. People were crushed. The fire spread. It was a brutal reminder that the people of King's Landing can become a force as destructive as any army. They had no banners, no commanders, no strategy. They had only hunger and rage. And those two things, when combined, are more dangerous than any blade or spell. Mysaria watched from a window in the Red Keep. She had done what she could. She had warned the Queen. She had tried to calm the city through her contacts, but the storm was too great. The White Worm, who had spent her life navigating the hidden currents of power, understood that some forces cannot be steered, they can only be survived. When the sun set on King's Landing that night, the city was changed. The Dragonpit was a smoking ruin. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of the small folk lay dead. The dragons that had not been killed had fled, and some would never return. The regime in the Red Keep was still standing, but it was wounded, isolated and hated, and in the aftermath, the Queen would look for someone to blame. She would look at the people who had failed to protect her, at the lords who had advised her poorly, at the spies who had not seen the danger soon enough. She would look, eventually, at the woman who had warned her and been ignored. The riot that began in the streets of King's Landing did not end when the sun went down. If anything, the darkness gave it a new shape. The mob that had gathered outside the Red Keep, hurling stones and curses at the gates, did not simply disperse when the guards refused to open the doors. They found other targets. They remembered other grievances, and somewhere in the warrens of the city, a whisper passed from mouth to mouth, growing louder with each repetition, until it became a single, terrible purpose. The Dragonpit had stood at the heart of King's Landing for centuries. It was a massive domed structure, built to house the creatures that made the Targaryens untouchable. Inside its cavernous chambers, dragons slept on beds of gold and stone, chained to the earth by custom and by the will of their riders. To the small folk, the Dragonpit was not just a building. It was a monument to everything they could never touch, a symbol of the power that had ruled them since before their great-grandparents were born. And on this night, that symbol became a target. The uprising reached its most shocking point when a mob stormed the Dragonpit. It was not a coordinated assault. There were no generals, no banners, no war councils. It was a flood of bodies, driven by hunger, by grief, by years of neglect, and the sudden, intoxicating realization that the masters of the city were afraid. The gates of the Dragonpit were not designed to withstand a siege from within the city walls. They were meant to keep out enemies from beyond the sea. Not the people who lived in the shadow of the dome every day. The mob broke through with the same desperation that had driven them to tear apart the streets. They poured into the caverns below, carrying torches and tools, their voices echoing off the stone. The dragons inside were not prepared for this. They had been fed and tended by keepers their entire lives. They knew the smell of blood and fire, but they did not know the smell of a mob. The first dragon to die was a young one, still chained to its perch. The people swarmed it with knives and hammers, climbing its body like ants on a carcass. The dragon roared and breathed flame, but the fire only killed a few, and the rest kept coming. They stabbed at its eyes, its throat, the soft scales under its wings. It took a long time for the beast to die, and the sound of its screams carried through the entire city. The other dragons in the pit heard the commotion. Some broke their chains and tried to escape, but the exits were blocked by the crowd. Others were too old or too weak to fight back. One by one, they were overwhelmed. The dragons, long treated as symbols of Targaryen invincibility, were attacked and killed by the very people they were meant to terrify. It was a reversal so complete that it seemed impossible, even as it happened. The creatures that had conquered kingdoms, that had burned armies and cities, that had made the Targaryens gods among men, were brought down by farmers and butchers and washerwomen, armed with nothing but rage, and the knowledge that they had nothing left to lose. By the time the night was over, the Dragonpit was a ruin. The great dome had collapsed in places, smoke pouring out of the cracks like the breath of a dying animal. The bodies of dragons lay twisted among the rubble, their blood pooling on the stone floor. The mob had not just killed the beasts, they had torn them apart, piece by piece, as if trying to destroy the very idea of what they represented. And in doing so, they had changed the war. The destruction changed the meaning of the war. Dragons could conquer cities, but they could not guarantee obedience. For generations, the Targaryens had relied on the fear their dragons inspired to keep the realm in line. That fear had been the foundation of their power, the unspoken threat that made every lord and every peasant think twice before defying the Iron Throne. But fear, as Mysaria had always known, is a double-edged sword. It can keep people in line for a time, but it cannot make them loyal, it cannot make them patient, and it cannot make them forget the weight of their own suffering. Mysaria's world of whispers had always understood what the Dragon Lords learned too late. Fear eventually curdles into revolt. The same terror that had kept the small folk silent for centuries had also been planting the seeds of its own destruction. Every time a dragon burned a village, every time a lord used his beast to enforce attacks or punish a rebellion, the memory of that fire was stored in the minds of the survivors. It was passed down to their children, woven into the stories they told at night. And when the moment came, when the dragons were finally within reach, all that stored fear turned into something else. It turned into action. The mob that stormed the Dragonpit was not a military force. They did not have a plan for what would happen after the dragons died. They did not have a leader to tell them what to do next. They were simply a wave of human desperation, crashing against the walls of a system that had never considered them worthy of notice. And in that single chaotic night, they accomplished what no army in the world had ever done. They broke the back of Targaryen power. The aftermath was a city in shock. The nobles who had survived the riot barricaded themselves in their mansions, afraid to step outside. The streets were littered with debris and the bodies of those who had fallen in the chaos. And in the Red Keep, Rhaenyra sat on the Iron Throne, surrounded by advisors who had no answers. She had come to King's Landing to claim her birthright, but the city she now ruled was a city that had just proven it could destroy the very symbols of her family's authority. The dragons were gone, the fear was gone, and what remained was a question that no one had ever dared to ask aloud. What happens to a dynasty when its monsters die? Mysaria had warned Rhaenyra that the city was a powder keg. She had told the Queen that the small folk were not to be trusted, that their loyalty was a fragile thing, easily broken by hunger and rumour. But even she had not predicted the full scope of what was about to happen. The storming of the Dragonpit was not just a riot. It was a revolution compressed into a single night, and it changed the calculus of the war in ways that no one could yet fully understand. For the Greens, the news from King's Landing was a gift. They had lost the capital, but they had not lost their dragons, and now the Blacks had lost theirs. The balance of power had shifted again, not through a battle or a treaty, but through the hands of the people who had been invisible to both sides. The war would continue, but it would be a different kind of war now. One fought without the certainty of dragonfire. One fought in the streets and the shadows, where whispers mattered more than flames. And in those shadows, Mysaria's network remained intact. Her agents had survived the riot, hidden among the crowds, watching and listening. They had seen the mob form, had heard the calls to march on the Dragonpit, had watched the dragons fall, and they had reported everything back to the White Worm, who sat in her chambers, processing the information with the cold precision of someone who had always known that the world was not as stable as the Dragon Lords believed. The destruction of the Dragonpit was a turning point, but it was not the end. The war would drag on, consuming more lives, more cities, more of everything that the realm had left to give, but the old certainties were gone. The dragons had been killed by the people they were meant to terrify, and that fact would echo through the rest of the conflict, shaping every decision, every alliance, every desperate gamble. Mysaria had spent her life learning how to survive in a world that did not value her. She had watched the powerful make mistakes, had seen them fall, had built her own power from the ruins of their arrogance, and now, as the smoke cleared over King's Landing, she understood something that the lords and ladies of the Red Keep were only beginning to grasp. The game had changed, and the players who could not adapt would be swept away, just as surely as the dragons had been. The mob had done its work. The Dragonpit lay open and silent, its great doors smashed, its sands soaked with blood. Dragons that had once been the terror of the world were dead, torn apart by men with axes and torches. The Targaryen dynasty had lost its most fearsome weapon, and the city of King's Landing was no longer a prize worth holding. Rhaenyra sat the Iron Throne, but the throne had never felt more fragile. The realm was bleeding, her treasury was empty, and the people she ruled now despised her. When a queen's power begins to crumble, she looks for enemies everywhere, and when she cannot find them beyond the walls, she begins to see them within. As Rhaenyra's position weakens, suspicion turns inward toward her own allies. The court becomes a place of whispers, of half-glances, of servants who listen too long at doors. And in this atmosphere, a new name begins to surface. A name spoken in the corridors of the Red Keep, in the camps of the Black Army, and most dangerously, in the ear of the Queen herself. The name is Nettles. She is a young dragon seed, one of the many bastards of Targaryen blood, who came forward during the war to claim a dragon. But Nettles is different. She is not a lord's daughter or a knight's ward. She is a girl of unknown origin, dark-haired and brown-skinned, with a wildness about her that no court could tame, and she rides a dragon called Sheep Stealer, a beast that was never tamed by any noble hand, only by hers, through patience and cunning, and something that looked almost like love. Sheep Stealer was a dragon of the wild, a creature that had avoided the Dragonpit for years, feeding on sheep from the Vale. Nettles did not try to dominate him. She brought him food, day after day, until he accepted her presence, and then she climbed onto his back and flew. The bond between them was strange and deep. Unlike the formal bonds of the great houses, it was the bond of two outcasts who had found each other. But in the court of a paranoid queen, such a bond becomes suspect, because Nettles is not just a dragon seed. She is a girl who spends time with Daemon Targaryen. Daemon had taken Nettles under his wing during the war in the Riverlands. He trained her, fought beside her, and she became his loyal companion. They flew together on their dragons, Caraxes and Sheep Stealer, hunting Lannister forces and burning enemy supply lines. The partnership was effective. It was also intimate. Rumors began to spread. Whispers that Daemon had taken the girl to his bed, that she was his new favorite, replacing the queen in his affections, that he was planning something. What, no one could say, but the suspicion alone was poison, and it is Mysaria who brings this poison to Rhaenyra. Mysaria informs Rhaenyra that Daemon is sleeping with the girl, or at least allows the accusation to reach the queen at its most volatile moment. The timing is deliberate. The queen is already reeling from the loss of the dragons, from the riots, from the desertion of her allies. Her hold on the throne is slipping, and she needs someone to blame. Mysaria gives her a target. But here is the cruel truth of intelligence work. The report exposes the dangerous ambiguity of intelligence. A secret can be true, false, incomplete, or weaponized. Mysaria may believe what she says. She may have heard it from a reliable source. She may have invented it to eliminate a rival. Or she may simply have passed along a rumor without caring whether it was true. Because the effect was what mattered. Rhaenyra does not question the source. She does not demand proof. She hears the accusation and her mind seizes on it. She orders that Nettles be captured and killed. She wants the girl's head sent to her as proof of Daemon's loyalty. The order is given. But Daemon is not a man who obeys orders easily. When he learns what Rhaenyra has commanded, he does not return to King's Landing. He does not send Nettles to her death. Instead, he sends her away to the Vale, where she can disappear into the mountains with her dragon, and then he waits. The bond between Rhaenyra and Daemon, already strained by war and loss, snaps. The queen has demanded the death of a girl who may have been innocent. The prince has refused to carry out the order, and the White Worm has woven another thread into the web, tightening it around everyone she touches. What happens next will test the limits of loyalty, revenge, and the cost of ruling from a throne that is no longer secure. The rumours about Nettles and Daemon did not emerge from nowhere. They were fed, shaped, and delivered by a whisperer who understood exactly how to wound a queen. Mysaria knew that Rhaenyra's greatest vulnerability was not the treasury or the war. It was her heart, and the fear that she might lose Daemon to someone younger, wilder, and freer. When the allegation reached Rhaenyra, it struck like a blade between the ribs. The queen did not pause to question the source. She did not demand proof. She reacted with fury and fear, a combination that clouded her judgment and turned her suspicion into a death sentence. She ordered that Nettles be seized and her head sent to the queen, treating the girl as a traitor and a rival. In that moment, Nettles was no longer a dragon seed who had fought for the black cause. She was a threat to be eliminated. The decision was reckless. It risked alienating Daemon at a moment when the black cause could least afford another fracture. Daemon had trained Nettles, trusted her, and perhaps felt something more. To demand her head was to demand that Daemon choose between his loyalty to Rhaenyra and his bond with the girl. It was a choice that could shatter the alliance that held the war together. Mysaria's information became a catalyst for disaster. She had not simply reported a rumour. She had reshaped the war by turning the queen's fear into action. Whisperers do not merely report events. They can create them, steer them, and destroy the people who trust them. This was the moment when the White Worm's influence reached its most destructive peak, and the consequences would ripple far beyond the walls of the Red Keep. Daemon learned of the order before it could be carried out. Perhaps a raven flew too slowly, or a messenger spoke too freely, but when the prince heard that Rhaenyra had commanded Nettles' head, something inside him cracked. He did not rage. He did not storm into the throne room. Instead, he grew cold, distant, and calculating. He flew to the place where Nettles had been training, a hidden valley in the Riverlands where Sheepstealer had made his lair. There, Daemon found the girl, still unaware of the queen's decree. He told her to flee. He gave her gold, a horse, and a warning. Never return to the Crownlands. Never seek the Black Court again. Nettles did not argue. She understood that the queen's love had curdled into poison, and that her own life was now a bargaining chip in a game she had never asked to play. She mounted Sheepstealer and disappeared into the clouds, leaving behind only ashes and the memory of a bond that had been pure. Daemon returned to King's Landing, but he was no longer the same man. He did not confront Rhaenyra directly. He did not defend Nettles. He simply withdrew. The prince, who had once burned for war, now sat silent in council meetings, offering nothing but a stare that cut deeper than any blade. Rhaenyra saw the change, but she did not apologize. She could not. To admit she had been wrong would be to admit that Mysaria had manipulated her, and that the White Worm's poison had seeped into the very heart of the Black Cause. Instead, she doubled down, surrounding herself with sycophants and whisperers who told her only what she wanted to hear. The fracture between the queen and her consort did not remain hidden for long. Lords who had pledged their swords to Rhaenyra began to notice the cold silence between the two Targaryens. Whispers spread through the camps. Daemon had been betrayed. Nettles had been driven away. The queen was losing her grip. Some saw it as weakness. Others saw it as a sign that the war was already lost. Desertions began. Small folk who had once cheered for the Black Queen now muttered curses under their breath. The dragon seeds, already wary after the betrayal of Hugh Hammer and Ulf White, grew even more distrustful. If the queen could order the death of a loyal rider like Nettles, what might she do to them? Mysaria watched it all unfold from her web of shadows. She had not merely started a rumour, she had pulled a thread that unravelled the entire tapestry of Rhaenyra's reign. The White Worm understood that a queen is only as strong as the loyalty she commands, and loyalty, once shattered, cannot be glued back together with dragonfire. The damage was done. Daemon would never again look at Rhaenyra with the same fire in his eyes. He would fight for her still, but only because the war demanded it, not because his heart commanded it. The love that had once burned as hot as dragon flame had been reduced to embers, and those embers would soon turn to ash. Nettles, meanwhile, became a ghost. Some say she flew beyond the narrow sea, to lands where dragons were only legend. Others claim she settled in the mountains of the Vale, living in solitude with Sheepstealer as her only companion. But one thing is certain: she never again fought for any throne. A girl who had tamed a wild dragon and ridden into battle for a queen, who later condemned her, became a cautionary tale. She was proof that in the Game of Thrones, even the most loyal can be discarded when fear overrules reason. The war dragged on, but the soul of the Black Cause had been hollowed out. Rhaenyra's decision to trust Mysaria over Daemon, to choose suspicion over love, would haunt her until the very end. And when the final blow came, it was not from an enemy army or a rival dragon. It came from the emptiness inside her, the void left by the trust she had destroyed. The White Worm had done her work well. She had turned the Queen's greatest strength into her greatest weakness. And in the end, that weakness would cost Rhaenyra everything. Rhaenyra's order was clear: seize Nettles and send her head to the Queen. The command came from the Red Keep, carried by ravens and whispered by messengers. But when it reached Daemon Targaryen, he did not obey. He refused to simply deliver the girl to Rhaenyra's justice. Perhaps he saw in Nettles something of himself, a wild thing untamed by court or crown. Or perhaps he understood that the accusation itself was a weapon, one forged in jealousy and wielded by those who feared his loyalty might drift. Whatever the reason, Daemon chose his own path as the war closed around him. He sent word to Nettles instead, warning her to flee. He gave her time, and with it, a chance to escape the Queen's wrath. That act of defiance was not born of love alone, but of a deeper recognition that the bonds between men and women, when exposed to the light of politics, become liabilities. His relationship with Mysaria now stood in stark contrast to his connection with Nettles. Both women had shared his bed, both had earned his trust, and both had become targets because of it. But where Mysaria had risen as a shadow in King's Landing, weaving her network through the city's gutters, Nettles was a creature of the open sky, riding a dragon as untamed as herself. Daemon's attachment to each revealed the same truth. Private bonds once known are never truly private. They become weapons for enemies, levers for allies, and chains for the one who holds them. The war had reached a point where suspicion was the only currency that held value. Rhaenyra, sitting in the throne she had fought so hard to claim, saw traitors everywhere, and perhaps she was right to. The court was a nest of whispers, and Mysaria, the white worm, was the one who fed them. She had warned the queen of the riots. She had supplied the intelligence that led to blood and cheese. And now she had whispered of Nettles. Whether she acted out of jealousy or strategy, the result was the same. Daemon was pushed away, and the realm burned a little brighter. Daemon's final campaigns began soon after. He gathered what forces remained loyal to him, and rode out from Harrenhal, not toward King's Landing, but toward the Riverlands, where his nephew Aemon Targaryen was burning villages and hunting for him. The two had avoided a direct confrontation for months, but the war was narrowing. Daemon knew that if he could kill Aemond, the Greens would lose their most fearsome dragon and their most ruthless commander. It was a gamble, but it was the only move left. He led his men through the rain-soaked fields and along the shores of the God's Eye, that great lake whose dark waters had swallowed secrets for centuries. There he found Aemond, mounted on Vargar, the largest dragon alive. The confrontation that followed was not a battle of armies, but a duel of dragons and riders, high above the water. Daemon rode Caraxes, the bloodworm, smaller than Vargar but faster and more savage. They clashed in the sky, tearing at each other with flame and fang, until both dragons and both riders fell into the lake, locked in a death embrace. Daemon Targaryen died that day, but so did Aemond, and the Greens lost their greatest weapon. By the time he fell, the prince who once elevated Mysaria had helped create a world where everyone was consumed by suspicion. He had taught her how to move in the shadows, how to turn secrets into power, and how to survive when the court turned against you. But in doing so, he had also set in motion the very forces that would tear apart the family he tried to protect. The dance of the dragons was not ended by his death. It only grew more bitter, more desperate as the survivors clawed for the throne, and Mysaria, the white worm, remained in the capital, watching the city burn from the inside. Her network still hummed with whispers. Her fingers still touched the levers of power. But the man who had once been her lover, her protector, and her patron was gone. The world he left behind was one where no bond was safe, no trust was sacred, and every whispered word could be the one that cost you your head. Daemon's refusal to hand over Nettles was the final fracture in a war already held together by little more than desperation. He chose the girl over the queen, and in doing so, he chose isolation. Mysaria watched that choice unfold from the shadows she had always occupied, and she understood its meaning better than most. If Daemon could abandon Rhaenyra for a dragon seed, then no bond in this war was safe, not even the one she had built with him over years of shared secrets and careful maneuvering. The book tradition places Mysaria's death in 130 AC, amid the final collapse of Rhaenyra's rule in King's Landing. By that point, the capital had become a cage for the Queen's regime. The treasury was empty, the people were starving, and the dragons that had once guaranteed Targaryen supremacy were either dead or scattered. Rhaenyra sat the Iron Throne, but she ruled a city that hated her, and Mysaria, the White Worm, the Mistress of Whisperers, the woman who had woven a web of informants through every alley and brothel and market stall, found that her web could no longer protect her. With the city changing hands and old protections vanishing, a web of influence can no longer guarantee survival. The mobs that had stormed the Dragonpit did not simply vanish after their victory. They remained in the streets, angry and unpredictable. The gold cloaks, once a tool of order, had become a fractured force, some loyal to the Queen, others to the memory of Daemon, still others to no one at all. Mysaria had built her power on knowing who to trust and when to pay. But in the chaos of a collapsing regime, trust becomes a luxury and payment becomes meaningless when the coin runs out. Her end is fittingly grim. A woman who mastered the capital's shadows is destroyed in the chaos of the city she helped shape. The accounts vary in their details, but the core remains consistent. She was seized by a mob, or perhaps by soldiers who had turned against the queen, and she was put to death in a manner that reflected the cruelty of the times. Some say she was hanged, others say she was torn apart by the crowd. Her body left in the mud of a street she had once known better than any map. A woman who had whispered secrets to princes and queens, who had orchestrated the murder of a child in his own bed, who had warned Rhaenyra of the coming storm, died without dignity and without a witness who cared to record her final words. The White Worm's fate confirms that proximity to power is not the same as security. She had stood beside Daemon when he was the king's brother, beside Rhaenyra when she was the heir, beside the throne when it seemed unshakable, but she had never sat on that throne. She had never held a dragon's reins. She had never commanded an army. Her power was borrowed, lent to her by those who needed her services, and when they no longer needed her, or when they could no longer protect her, the power evaporated. In the end, she was just a foreign woman in a hostile city, a woman whose pale skin and Lycene accent marked her as an outsider, no matter how many secrets she controlled. The fall of Lady Mysaria is a lesson written in blood and fire, but it is not the only lesson the Dance of the Dragons leaves behind. The war did not end with her death. It continued to grind forward, consuming those who had once seemed untouchable, and leaving behind a kingdom so broken that it would take generations to heal. The shadows Mysaria had mastered would be filled by others, by men like Brynden Rivers, who would learn from her methods and build an intelligence network far more enduring than anything she had managed. But that is a story for another time. For now, the White Worm is gone, and the city she helped shape moves on without her, indifferent to the memory of a woman who once held its darkest secrets in her hands. And so the war ground on, its appetite for blood unsated by the death of one spy. Rhaenyra's hold on King's Landing grew more precarious by the day. The small folk, who had once cheered her arrival, now cursed her name as they queued for bread that never came. The dragons that remained, Syrax, Araxes and the young ones, were no longer symbols of power but targets of fear and resentment. The queen herself came a prisoner in her own castle, surrounded by whispers of betrayal and the ever-present threat of the mob. It was in this atmosphere of decay that the city finally turned. The storming of the Dragonpit had been a warning, but Rhaenyra did not heed it. She clung to the throne with the desperation of a drowning woman, unaware that the tide had already swept her away. When the gates of King's Landing were thrown open to Aegon II's forces, it was not a battle, but a collapse. Rhaenyra fled through a hidden passage, her crown clutched to her chest, her son Aegon the Younger at her side. She escaped the city, but she could not escape her fate. The queen who had once ridden Syrax above the streets of the capital now crept through the mud like a common outlaw. She made her way to Dragonstone, the island of her birth, hoping to find refuge among the loyalists who had once served her father, but Dragonstone had already fallen. The garrison, under the command of a man named Alfred Broom, had turned against her. They seized her as soon as she arrived, and in a cruel echo of the justice she had once dispensed, they delivered her to her half-brother's men. The end of Rhaenyra Targaryen was not the death of a warrior queen, but the execution of a prisoner. She was bound and brought before the dragon Sunfair, who had been wounded and was barely alive himself. But even a broken dragon could still breathe fire. In a field of ash and stone, Sunfire consumed the woman who had once been the realm's delight. Her son, the young Aegon, was forced to watch. It was a death that mirrored the cruelty of the war itself, a war that had begun with a stolen crown and ended with a queen devoured by her own family's symbol. But the war did not end with Rhaenyra's death. The Blacks, though leaderless, did not surrender. They rallied around the memory of the queen and the claim of her surviving son. The fighting continued in the rivers and the hills, in the castles and the fields, until the realm was so exhausted that even the dragons could no longer sustain the conflict. One by one, the great beasts fell. Vaga, the oldest and largest, died in battle above the God's Eye, taking Prince Aemond with her. Caraxes and Daemon vanished into the same lake, their fates sealed in a duel that became legend. The dragons that remained were either too young, too wounded, or too wild to be of use. The dance of the dragons became a war without dragons, a grinding struggle of men and steel. It was not until the hour of the wolf that the war truly ended. Lord Cregan Stark of Winterfell marched south with an army of Northerners, determined to bring justice to the chaos. He arrived in King's Landing to find a city in ruins, a throne occupied by a child king, and a realm that had lost all sense of order. Cregan took control, executed those he deemed responsible for the worst atrocities, and then, just as suddenly as he had come, he returned north. The war was over, but the scars it left behind would never fully heal. The Targaryen dynasty survived, but it was a shadow of its former self. The dragons were gone, and with them, the magic that had once made the family seem more than mortal. And so the story of the Dance of the Dragons ends not with a bang, but with a whimper. A long, slow recovery from a wound that bled the realm dry. The names of the dead, Rhaenyra, Daemon, Aemond, Aegon, and so many others, faded into history, remembered only by maesters and singers. But the lessons of the war, the dangers of ambition, and the cost of division remained. They lingered in the halls of the Red Keep, in the whispers of the small folk, and in the hearts of those who had lived through the fire. The White Worm was gone, but her legacy, like the war itself, was written in blood that would not wash away. Mysaria's death in 130 AC is recorded in the book tradition as a quiet end for a woman who'd spent her life in the shadows. No chronicler marks the exact day, no maester pens a eulogy. She simply vanishes from the records of King's Landing, swallowed by the chaos of a city that had already turned against her. And yet, when we ask what the White Worm left behind, the answer is not a simple one. Mysaria leaves behind no great house, no dragon-riding bloodline, and no castle bearing her name. She was born in a Lycene pleasure house, or perhaps in the far east of Yeti, depending on which account you trust. She arrived in Westeros with nothing but her wits and her will to survive. She never sat on a council, never commanded an army, never mounted a dragon. By the standards of the great families, she was nothing. But in the Dance of the Dragons, her fingerprints are everywhere. Consider Daemon's revenge. After Lucerys Valerian's death, it was Mysaria who helped arrange the assassination of Prince Jaehaerys. Blood and cheese were her tools, or at least her contacts. The plan was brutal, deliberate, and devastating. It shattered the Green's sense of security and turned the war personal. That was Mysaria's hand at work, moving pieces from the underworld into the Red Keep. Consider Rhaenyra's intelligence network. When the Queen took King's Landing, she needed eyes and ears in every alley and tavern. Mysaria became her Mistress of Whisperers in all but name. She knew the city's secrets, the loyalties of its merchants, the whispers of its servants. She fed Rhaenyra information that no lord could provide. That network was the backbone of the Black Regime's early control of the capital. Consider the Riot. When the mob began to stir, it was Mysaria who warned Rhaenyra that the city was about to boil over. The Queen dismissed her, but the warning was accurate. The storming of the Dragonpit followed, and with it, the collapse of Targaryen power in King's Landing. Mysaria saw it coming before anyone else. And consider the Nettles crisis. It was Mysaria who told Rhaenyra that Daemon was sleeping with the Dragonseed girl. Whether the accusation was true or exaggerated, the effect was immediate. Rhaenyra ordered Nettles' head sent to her, and Daemon chose to defy his queen rather than deliver her. That fracture, fed by Mysaria's intelligence, changed the course of the war. She embodies the hidden machinery of Westerosi politics, where servants, spies, courtesans, and informers can move history from beneath the throne. The lords and ladies fight their battles in the open, with steel and fire, but the real decisions are often made in the dark, by people whose names never appear in the official histories. Mysaria is one of those people, and her story survives because it reveals that truth. The White Worm's story endures because she proves that in a kingdom ruled by dragons, the most dangerous weapon may still be a secret. A dragon can burn a city, but a whisper can burn a dynasty. Mysaria understood that better than anyone. She wielded information like a blade, and she used it to carve a place for herself in a world that had no room for her. So what is her legacy? It is not a monument or a bloodline. It is the lesson that power does not always sit on a throne. It can hide in the smile of a courtesan, in the loyalty of a servant, in the silence of a spy. The White Worm left no castle, but she left a mark on the Dance of the Dragons that no dragon rider could erase. And in the end, that is the only kind of legacy that truly matters in a world built on fire and blood. And yet, for all her influence, Mysaria remains a ghost in the historical record. The maesters who compiled mention her only in passing, often with sneer or a moralizing note about the dangers of low-born schemers. But that very dismissal is part of her power. He never sought to be remembered by the lords who write the histories. She sought to be effective in the moment, to survive, to shape outcomes from the margins. And in that, she succeeded beyond measure. Consider the question of loyalty. In a world where oaths are sworn to houses and crowns, Mysaria's only allegiance was to herself. She served Rhaenyra when it served her, fed Daemon's paranoia when it suited her, and abandoned the queen the moment the city turned. Some call that treachery. But in the game of whispers, survival is the only virtue. The White Worm understood that power is not about honor. It is about leverage. She held leverage over everyone she encountered, and she never let it go until the very end. Her death, if it was a death, remains ambiguous. Some say she was killed in the riots, trampled by the mob she had warned about. Others whisper that she escaped King's Landing, slipped onto a ship bound for Bravos or Pentos, and lived out her days in quiet anonymity. There is even a tale, likely apocryphal, that she returned to Lys and bought the pleasure house where she was born, only to burn it down and walk away. The truth is lost, and perhaps that is fitting. Mysaria spent her life hiding in the shadows. It is only right that her end should be hidden as well. What she leaves behind is not a story of dragons or battles, but a story of information. In every great conflict, there are those who fight and those who watch. Mysaria was the ultimate watcher, the one who knew where the bodies were buried, literally and figuratively. Her legacy is a reminder that the most dangerous person in any room is often the one no one notices. The servant pouring the wine, the courtesan whispering in the Lord's ear, the spy who smiles and bows. They are the ones who truly move the pieces on the board. So when we speak of the Dance of the Dragons, let us not forget the White Worm. Let us remember that while dragons fought in the sky, a woman with no name, no house, and no dragon waged a war of her own, and won. Because in the end, history is written by the victors, but it is shaped by the whispers. And Mysaria's whispers echo still, long after the last dragon died.